Chapter 181, The End of the Year Festival, 4. After speaking with Paul, everything was finally done. The first year at Mythos Academy had drawn to a close, and I stood at the pinnacle. Sovereign. Rank 1. I had surpassed Lucifer Windward, outlasted Renkagu, outdueled the prodigies of my year. The gap between me and the so-called untouchables had vanished, not by chance, but by effort, by sheer force of will. And yet, standing at the summit, I found myself staring into the distance rather than down at those I had surpassed. There were still questions, too many, pressing at the edges of my mind. Why was I here? Why had I taken this body? What force had woven my existence into this world? I did not belong. And yet, I was here. I was Arthur Nightingale. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I needed to move forward, to stop looking over my shoulder at the life I had left behind. Because Emma would have wanted me to. The Sovereigns Tournament was only the crown jewel of a much larger spectacle, the end-of-year festival, the grand conclusion to the academic cycle at Mythos Academy. An event of prestige and tradition, a final moment of levity before students dispersed for the summer. The festival was not open to the public, nor was it broadcasted to the world. Mythos Academy stood alone on its secluded island, a place of power and privilege where only the chosen walked. The world could only speculate, could only wait for the students who emerged, stronger, sharper, more prepared for whatever fate had in store for them. Within the academy, however, the festival was nothing short of spectacular. The stone courtyards, usually places of quiet discussion and hurried steps between lessons, had transformed into bustling avenues of lights, music, and energy. Stalls had been erected overnight, each run by students eager to showcase their talents or earn a few credits before the year ended. One section of the academy had become a marketplace, selling rare goods from distant lands, enchanted trinkets, carefully inscribed spell tomes, and weapons imbued with unique properties. Another section housed games of skill and magic, where students tested their abilities for sport rather than survival. Music spilled through the streets from makeshift stages where performers displayed their craft. Ethereal dancers moved in sync with floating ribbons of mana, instruments hummed with sound amplification magic, and illusionists wove dazzling scenes in the air, turning the very sky into a shifting tapestry of colors and constellations. Laughter and conversation blended into a chorus of life, an atmosphere so removed from the grueling battles of the past weeks that it almost felt like an entirely different world. And yet, despite the festivities, there was an unspoken reverence in the air. No one openly acknowledged it, but everyone knew, there was a new sovereign. Rankings had shifted. The hierarchy had been rearranged. Arthur Nightingale now stood at the very top. But in this moment, among the lanterns and laughter, it almost felt like that didn't matter. Because for the first time in a long while, Mythos Academy was not a battlefield. It was a place of celebration. The festival was in full swing, a riot of colors, scents, and sounds that filled the isolated island of Mythos Academy with rare warmth. Lanterns floated lazily through the air, their soft glow adding to the almost dreamlike quality of the evening. Stalls lined the pathways, bursting with all manner of delights, grilled skewers dripping with sauce, bubbling cauldrons of exotic drinks, shimmering enchanted trinkets promising fleeting bursts of luck. And at the heart of it all was us. Rachel, Seraphina, Cecilia, Rose, and me. My family had left for Avalon earlier, leaving me to navigate the chaos of the festival with what could only be described as the four most contrasting personalities imaginable. Rachel, dressed in a casual t-shirt and jeans, had the confident ease of someone who had walked through 100 festivals before, her sapphire eyes scanning every stall like a seasoned connoisseur. She was in her element, keeping up an effortless flow of conversation, pausing only to dramatically recommend her favorite foods. Seraphina, ever composed, walked beside her with an air of quiet detachment. She wore simple, elegant clothes, a flowing dark blouse and slacks, her silver hair catching the lantern light like moonlit silk. She had no real interest in the festival, but she wasn't against it either. She simply existed in the moment, observing everything with that sharp, analytical gaze of hers. Cecilia, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. If Rachel was navigating and Serafina was observing, Cecilia was conquering. She strode ahead, her cropped top and shorts making it clear she cared more about comfort than anything else, her golden locks bouncing as she grabbed me by the wrist. "Come on, Arthur," she groaned, dragging me forward with surprising strength. "You move like an old man. If we're going to do this, we're doing it my way." "I am walking," I pointed out. "You're ambling," she corrected. "We need to eat. Immediately." And then there was Rose. Sweet, gentle Rose, somehow both the youngest looking and the most mature among us. She had her own agenda, mainly consisting of scouting out any bookstalls tucked away in the festival's hidden corners. Cecilia, who had no patience for the refined art of wandering, led us straight to the food stalls, where Rachel promptly launched into a passionate speech about the superiority of a particular honey-filled pastry. "You have to try this," she declared, handing me one. I bit into it, the warm, sweet filling melting on my tongue. It was, unsurprisingly, very good. "Not bad," I admitted. Rachel grinned. "Not bad? It's perfection. This is the best thing you'll eat all year." Serafina, who had been watching the entire ordeal in silence, finally spoke. "You say that about everything you eat, Rachel." Rachel turned to her with a dramatic sigh. "That's because I have taste. I appreciate the finer things in life." Serafina blinked, unimpressed. "And yet, you still eat instant noodles when you're alone." Cecilia burst into laughter, while Rachel sputtered, trying to come up with a suitable defense. Rose, watching from the sidelines, simply smiled and took a slow sip from the manna-infused tea she had somehow acquired without anyone noticing. The banter carried on as we moved deeper into the festival. At some point, we found ourselves by a large fountain, taking a moment to breathe. The sounds of laughter and music filled the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no tension, no battle to fight, no rankings to worry about. Just us. "So," I said, glancing at them, "having fun?" Rose's voice was gentle. "It's nice." "Nice?" Cecilia scoffed. "It's amazing. I love festivals. They have a kind of reckless charm, don't you think?" Rachel stretched her arms above her head, looking perfectly content. "I like the energy. Everyone's here to enjoy themselves." Serafina simply nodded, her ice blue eyes reflecting the lantern light. Rachel suddenly perked up. "Oh. We have to watch the fireworks. They're the best part." "Fireworks?" Serafina asked. "I've never seen them before." Rachel gasped, placing both hands on Serafina's shoulders. "You, what?" "I've never seen them before," Serafina repeated, her tone neutral. Rachel shook her head in exaggerated despair. "This is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable." Cecilia smirked. "Looks like you're getting dragged into a new experience, Sarah." Serafina sighed but didn't protest. And so, we made our way to the open field, where the crowd had already gathered. The night sky stretched endlessly above us, clear and dark, waiting. We sat down on the grass, close together, the warmth of the day still lingering in the air. Then, with a sharp crack, the first firework shot into the sky, bursting into a bloom of gold and silver. The crowd gasped, then cheered, the excitement contagious. Rachel nudged Serafina. "Well? What do you think?" Serafina's lips parted slightly as she watched the sky, her usual sharpness fading into something softer. "It's beautiful." More fireworks followed, filling the sky with bursts of crimson, sapphire, emerald, each one illuminating our faces with its glow. The patterns grew more intricate, weaving together in perfect synchrony, an art form of light and magic. Rachel let out a breathless laugh. "Told you they were good." Serafina just nodded, her gaze never leaving the sky. I leaned back on the grass, letting the world blur around me. There were no battles tonight. No rankings. No burdens. Just fireworks, laughter, and the quiet comfort of being surrounded by people who, in their own ways, made life brighter. The last firework exploded in a brilliant cascade of gold, lighting up the entire island before fading into the night. The crowd clapped and cheered, but we remained still, lost in the moment. Rachel stretched, sighing in satisfaction. That was even better than last year. We should do this every year, Rose said softly. Chapter 182, The End of the Year Festival, 5. The festival had come to an end, but the island wasn't empty just yet. We still had a few days before summer break officially started, before we'd scatter across the world to return to our homes, our families, our separate lives, at least for a little while. For tonight, though, the four of them had come to my room. The academy wasn't particularly strict about things like this, despite what outsiders might assume. Mythos Academy fostered competition, talent, and ambition above all else. Whether it was training or socializing, they didn't care, as long as you emerged stronger by the end of it. Rachel, Serafina, Cecilia, and Rose sat comfortably in my room, a mix of curiosity and expectation in their gazes. So, Arthur, Rachel was the first to speak, her voice carrying the distinct lilt of amusement she always had when she was about to tease me. You said you wanted to talk about something important? I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of my own thoughts pressing down on me. Yes, I admitted, my voice softer than usual. There's something I need to say. I hesitated, gathering my thoughts. How was I supposed to explain something I had barely even admitted to myself? I had spent so much of my life pretending. Pretending to be naive, pretending to be weaker than I was. At first, it was a necessity. A survival tactic. There had been no room for trust, no space for attachments. The only rule that mattered was simple: make people love you, but never love them back. That was how you survived. I had learned that lesson the hard way. But then, I thought of her. The girl from my past life. The one person who had accepted me when no one else would. Emma. I could still remember the warmth of her arms around me, the quiet sadness in her voice as she held me close for the last time. Do not live this way, please. Even now, her words echoed in my mind, a plea from a girl who no longer existed in this world. I had buried my feelings back then. Warped them. Crushed them. Changed them. All just to keep going. But I was tired. I didn't want to live like that anymore. I wanted something real. I looked at them, Rachel, Serafina, Cecilia, Rose. The four girls who had, in one way or another, changed everything for me. Who had made my world feel bigger, brighter, fuller. Each of them was watching me, waiting for whatever it was I had to say. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Not yet, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. But not yet. Cecilia's sharp red eyes narrowed slightly. Rachel tilted her head, watching me carefully. Serafina remained still, unreadable as ever. And Rose just waited, as if she already knew. I know what I said, I continued, exhaling, and I meant it. But before I commit to anything, I need to be sure of something first. I clenched my fists at my sides. Before I could let myself love someone, I needed to know who I was. I needed to know, with absolute certainty, that I was Arthur. Not just a lost soul who had stumbled into this world by accident, not just a borrowed name in a borrowed life. Until then. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, meeting their gazes one by one. Rachel's deep blue. Serafina's ice blue. Cecilia's crimson red. Rose's warm brown. They were the first people who had made me feel alive in a very long time. The first people who had reminded me that my heart was still capable of beating. I let out a breath and smiled. I like all of you, I admitted, tilting my head slightly, a wry smile tugging at my lips. Romantically. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending. I pressed my lips together, hands resting on my knees, waiting for their response. It wasn't often that silence carried the weight of a falling guillotine. Maybe they'd reject me outright. Polygamy existed in this world, sure, but it wasn't exactly common, especially not among people with personalities as strong as theirs. Rachel, Cecilia, Serafina, and Rose, each of them had a will of steel, an ego sharpened by talent and upbringing. It wasn't as simple as saying, "I like you all, let's figure this out." But I'd said it anyway. And now, I was waiting. Rachel was the first to move. She smiled at me, the kind that softened the edges of my nerves, though there was something else in her eyes, something both knowing and expectant. "You beat me to it, huh?" she said, and my breath caught. She reached out, placing a hand over mine. "Arthur, for a long time, my heart has been yours." Her fingers curled slightly, a squeeze, as if she needed to anchor herself in the moment. "I want to be yours." A warmth I couldn't quite name spread through my chest. "And as for waiting," Rachel added, her sapphire eyes gleaming, "I don't mind waiting a bit for someone like you." I barely had a moment to process before Rose spoke up, her voice quieter but just as firm. "I agree," she said, cheeks dusted with red. I also like you more than just a friend, Arthur." Rose. The girl who had always been there, steady and kind, always offering quiet support without demanding anything in return. Hearing her say it outright, admitting something that had likely sat unspoken for a long time, made something tighten in my throat. Cecilia let out a dramatic sigh, arms crossed, her crimson eyes darting anywhere but at me. "Well," she said, voice laced with a nervous bravado that was utterly unlike her, "before I say anything, I should probably apologize for how I acted before." She inhaled sharply, then forced herself to meet my gaze. I wasn't exactly great to you in the beginning. I pushed you away, toyed with you, treated you like some plaything when she swallowed. When I was too much of a coward to admit I actually liked you." Cecilia, the ever playful, ever unpredictable, suddenly seemed so much more human. "I'm sorry," she said, softer now. "I genuinely like you, Arthur." And then, finally, Serafina spoke. "Me too," she said simply, with that quiet, composed certainty that only she could pull off. "I like you too." I exhaled, slow and measured, though my heart was anything but. "Thank you," I said, looking at each of them, taking in the weight of their words, the emotions brimming beneath them. "For caring about me. For trusting me with this." I inhaled. "Anne. I won't keep you waiting long," I promised, voice steadier than I felt. I need to be ready. For all of you." Rachel smirked, though there was no bite to it, only something warm and teasing. "You better not," she said, nudging me lightly. That was all it took for the tension to shatter. The room filled with laughter, light and easy, washing away the heaviness of the moment. It didn't fix everything, didn't erase the inevitable complications that would come, but for now, it was enough. For now, it was perfect. The four of them excused themselves after a while, each leaving me with something, a lingering glance, a small smile, a playful shove. When the door finally closed, I fell back onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the day settle into my bones. This was the best day of my life. Chapter 183, The End of the Year Festival, 6. "Wow. He really confessed," Rachel muttered, staring at the three other girls gathered in her room. The air was thick with something unspoken, something electric that neither of them wanted to acknowledge too soon. Arthur had gone to sleep early, exhausted after the day's battles, not that anyone could blame him. Fighting Lucifer in the morning and then baring his heart in the evening? It was enough to drain anyone. "I wasn't expecting it," Serafina admitted, her voice steady but softer than usual. Her silver hair caught the dim glow of the room's ambient lighting, making her seem almost ethereal. It was real. I couldn't feel anything but truth in his words. "Same here," Cecilia added, stretching her arms behind her head as she lounged on the couch. I was drawn to him early on, mostly because he had so many layers to unravel. But in that moment, every last one of them peeled away. No mystery. No masks. Just him. Her voice wavered slightly as her cheeks darkened. He really likes us. Rachel's sapphire eyes gleamed mischievously as she pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A soft click, and then. Arthur is precious to me, Cecilia's recorded voice rang out through the room. Silence. Rose blinked, then let out a quiet chuckle. Serafina tilted her head, her normally unreadable expression betraying a flicker of amusement. Cecilia, on the other hand, turned an immediate, fiery shade of red. Oh, really? She snapped, fumbling for her own phone. All right, Saintess, let's not pretend you're any better. Another soft click. Rachel's own voice blared back at her. The world stood still for a second. Rose, for the first time that evening, looked genuinely stunned, her mouth slightly parted. Serafina's icy composure cracked as a faint pink dusted her normally pale cheeks. Rachel, meanwhile, had gone rigid, her brain buffering like a failing AI. You, she choked out, eyes wide in mortified betrayal. Cecilia's smirk was victorious. Play with fire, Saintess, and you will get burned, she said, leaning back like a queen on her throne. You brought out the recordings first. Rachel, still recovering from the auditory assassination of her dignity, tried to rally. Why, you're just trying to distract from the fact that you keep flashing skin to get his attention, she accused, pointing an unsteady finger at Cecilia. Cecilia arched a delicate brow and glanced down at her outfit. A casual crop top. Huh. It's just a crop top, she said, feigning innocence. Then she grinned, voice laced with wicked amusement. You know, boys tend to like girls who are a bit wild. Arthur isn't like that. Rachel shot back, crossing her arms with conviction. He's still a teenage boy, Cecilia sing-songed. Rachel opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came out. Her mind betrayed her with the sudden memory of the way Arthur had looked at her, at all of them, earlier. That moment of raw honesty. Cecilia let out a satisfied chuckle. Well, none of you have kissed him yet anyway. That single statement was the verbal equivalent of tossing a mana grenade into the room. The atmosphere changed. Serafina, who had been relatively quiet throughout the exchange, slowly turned her gaze towards Cecilia. The air around her suddenly felt colder. You kissed him? She asked, her voice deceptively calm. The temperature in the room dropped. Rose, who had been spectating with amusement until now, took a slow sip from her drink as if debating whether she should stay or evacuate. Cecilia, for the first time that evening, hesitated. Rachel's eyes sharpened, Saintess mode activating. Cecilia. Cecilia raised her hands in mock surrender. Now. Let's not jump to conclusions, ladies. But Serafina's icy stare did not waver. Rachel was still locked on her like a targeting system. And Rose? Rose was just enjoying the chaos. So, Serafina repeated, voice slow, measured. Did you kiss him? Yes, Cecilia declared without a shred of shame, arms folded as she leaned back, smirking. I took the first step, all right? He's hot. I'm a girl. Sue me. Rachel and Serafina blinked, staring at her as if she had just confessed to committing treason. You, Rachel started, visibly struggling to process the sheer audacity. Just admitted that out loud, Serafina finished, her silver eyes narrowing slightly in what could have been mild amusement. What? Like you two haven't noticed? Cecilia scoffed, flipping her golden hair over her shoulder. Come on, we all have eyes. And let's be real, he's only getting hotter by the day. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it, looking vaguely betrayed by reality itself. Serafina, however, tilted her head slightly, a thoughtful look crossing her face before she spoke in her usual calm tone. I was the first one he saw in a swimsuit. The room went silent. The three other girls slowly turned to face her. Serafina merely blinked at them, her expression as composed as ever. A bikini, she clarified, as if that somehow explained everything. Cecilia raised an eyebrow. And? Serafina shrugged. I was going for a swim. He happened to be there. Though, she added, her voice carrying the barest hint of amusement, he couldn't take his eyes off me. Rachel's expression contorted somewhere between disbelief and despair. That's. Rose, beside her, was nodding sagely, as if she had seen this coming. Rachel groaned, burying her face in her hands before looking up, determination flashing in her sapphire eyes. I loved him first, she declared, though her voice faltered toward the end, sounding less like a proclamation and more like a plea for validation. Silence. Then, Cecilia chuckled. And what has that gotten you? Rachel deflated instantly, looking away. Rose, ever the supportive friend, patted her gently on the shoulder. Cecilia, however, was already grinning again. Anyway, if you really wanted to get ahead, there's a certain action you could take. He wouldn't be able to resist you. Rachel's head snapped up. What action? Cecilia's smirk widened. I'm not telling. Rose, tell me. Rachel turned desperately to her, grabbing her hands. Rose simply averted her gaze, a small knowing smile on her lips. Sorry, Rachel. It would be too unfair. Rachel pouted, turning towards Serafina, who merely shook her head, unimpressed by the display. Rachel slumped in defeat. Well, Cecilia sighed dramatically, stretching her arms behind her head, it doesn't really matter. I'll be monopolizing him for summer break anyway. Rose, who had been quietly sipping her tea, set down her cup with a soft clink. He's coming to Avalon, you know. I live in Avalon too. Cecilia's smirk wavered, just for a moment. Serafina, watching the exchange, let out the tiniest, most imperceptible hum of satisfaction. My uncle helped him create his grade 6 art, Serafina said, her voice as steady as ever, though a faint note of satisfaction lingered beneath the surface. He'll return to Mount Hua soon enough. Rachel's expression twitched. She folded her arms, tapping her fingers against her elbow as if searching for an argument, something, anything, that the Creighton family could offer in return. But no matter how she turned it over in her head, there was nothing. Arthur already had the Laplace method for 5-circle magic, a technique that placed him on par with the finest spellcasters of her family. When he reached the integration stage, the Tower of Magic's method for 6-circle casting would serve him just as well as Creighton's techniques. Rachel, for the first time in a long while, had nothing. Cecilia grinned, positively radiant in her enjoyment of Rachel's plight. Oh, what a rare sight. The Saintess is down in the dumps, she cooed, her voice practically dripping with amusement. She leaned forward, a teasing glint in her eyes. Do you need a hug, Ratch? Some words of encouragement? Rachel's fingers twitched. Serafina, watching from the sidelines, sighed internally. Here we go again. Then, as if struck by divine revelation, Rachel clapped her hands together, her sapphire eyes bright with triumph. Light magic. Cecilia blinked. Yes. It's a huge part of his arsenal. I can help him with that. Rachel declared, practically glowing with smug confidence. Cecilia tilted her head, then, with deliberate slowness, let out a small chuckle. It grew into full-blown laughter, rich and taunting. Oh wow, she gasped between giggles. How incredibly helpful. Teach him to do what he's already naturally better at. Rachel's triumphant expression soured in an instant. She started, but Cecilia, still grinning, clasped her hands behind her back and leaned in with a smirk. What's next? Cecilia continued, thoroughly enjoying herself. Are you going to offer him a crash course in how to breathe? Maybe some private lessons on blinking efficiently? Rachel's glare sharpened, her aura flickering dangerously close to a full-blown explosion. On the sidelines, Rose observed the back and forth with mild curiosity. She turned her gaze towards Serafina, who, to Rose's mild surprise, was watching the exchange with the mild detachment of someone observing the weather. "Is it always like this with them?" Rose asked, raising a brow. Serafina exhaled, the smallest shake of her head betraying her weariness. "Always." As Rachel and Cecilia continued their bickering, Serafina simply sat down, resting her chin on her hand. It was going to be a long night. Chapter 184, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 1. The first year at Mythos Academy had come to an end. 9 months. Nearly an entire year in this world. The time had slipped past faster than I ever could have anticipated. When I first arrived here, reality had been a weight pressing down on me, a world brimming with prodigies, monstrous talents who outstripped me in every conceivable way. Power, influence, resources, experience, I had none of it. Not compared to them. I had to be careful. I had to be smart. I had to survive. But now? I hadn't just caught up. I had surpassed them. Lucifer. Ren. Cecilia. Rachel. Jean. Ian. Serafina. The others. Every single one of them had been ahead of me when I first arrived. Now, I stood at the peak of my year. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Strength was a fleeting thing in this world, a transient moment between one struggle and the next. If I stopped pushing forward, I would be left behind. And that was unacceptable. I leaned back into my seat, staring out the window as the flight hummed steadily toward Avalon. There were too many things to do, too many loose ends to tie up before my second year began. First, I had to figure out the truth about Arthur Nightingale, the real one. Luna had no answers. That alone unsettled me more than I cared to admit. The memories of this body belonged to him, but they had been nothing more than a faint echo in the back of my mind. A shadow of a life that should have been lived but wasn't. And that meant there was a question I had yet to answer. Where was the original Arthur Nightingale? No one, not even Luna, had an answer for that. And if she didn't know, then whatever had happened to him was beyond anything I had encountered so far. I exhaled slowly, letting my thoughts settle into something tangible. I needed a plan. 3 months. That was how long the summer break would last. 3 months to sharpen myself into something even greater than I was now. 7 months until the Inter-Academy Festival. And by then, I needed to reach integration rank. It was ambitious. Maybe even reckless. But I had never been one to take the safe route. I also had the Tower of Magic to train at, thanks to my newfound sponsorship under Charlotte Alaric. That in itself would be invaluable, not just for magic but for the connections I could make. Then, there was Mount Hua. I owed Master Li a visit, and his training would be useful in refining my swordsmanship. Serafina, too, I needed to check on her. Rachel. I had to meet with Alastair Creighton and claim my reward. More than that, I needed to spend time with Rachel before she went off to whatever grueling training the Creighton family had prepared for her. And Arden Windward. He owed me a prize from our bet. It was time to collect. You're going to be busy, Luna mused, her voice curling into my thoughts like smoke. Yeah. The hum of the engines shifted slightly as the plane began its descent. Avalon. Home. It was a strange word to assign to this place. Even stranger to assign to the people waiting for me. But they were mine, weren't they? The first family I had ever truly had. And despite everything else, the battles, the ambitions, the responsibilities, there was a part of me that found comfort in that. When I stepped through the door of our home, a wave of warmth washed over me. It wasn't the kind of warmth that came from temperature, but the kind that seeped into your bones, a quiet comfort you never quite realized you missed until you had it again. The familiar scent of home-cooked food, spices, fresh bread, and something sweet baking in the oven, filled the air. My mother always had a knack for making the house feel welcoming, and after months at Mythos Academy, the contrast was almost overwhelming. Before I could take another step, a blur of movement slammed into me. Arthur. My little sister, Arya, latched onto me like a barnacle, squeezing me with all the strength her small arms could muster. You're finally back. Did you bring me anything? I chuckled, ruffling her hair. You don't even say hi first. She pulled back, pouting, her azure eyes, our mother's, narrowing in accusation. You were gone forever. That deserves a present. I smirked and pulled out a small, enchanted snow globe from my spatial ring. Inside, tiny figures moved in a never-ending dance, a miniature illusion spell keeping it animated. Here. Straight from Mount Hua. Arya's face lit up, and she snatched it eagerly, shaking it despite my warning glance. This is so cool. Our mother stepped into the living room, wiping her hands on her apron, her warm eyes settling on me with the kind of look only a mother could give, a mix of exasperation and affection. You've grown again. I smiled sheepishly. It happens. She sighed, then walked up to pull me into a hug, far gentler than Arya's, but just as firm. I saw your matches. She leaned back slightly, her gaze scanning me. You didn't get hurt, did you? Not in any way that mattered. My father walked in then, his expression more reserved, but there was a quiet pride in his eyes. He wasn't the kind of man who gushed over achievements, but I knew him well enough to recognize when he was impressed. You did well, he said simply. Thanks, Dad. He nodded, then gestured toward the couch. Sit. You can tell us everything over dinner. It didn't take long before we were all gathered at the dining table, the usual home-cooked feast laid out in front of us. Arya was already halfway through her plate, bouncing in her seat as I recounted everything that had happened over the past few months. Well, my mother said after I finished the short version, you certainly know how to keep busy. I gave a tired chuckle. You could say that. She smiled knowingly, then exchanged a glance with my father before setting down her fork. There's something else. I raised a brow. Something else? She nodded. We received an invitation. For all of us. I frowned. That was odd. My family wasn't part of any noble house. Invitations, especially formal ones, weren't something we normally received. To what? I asked. To Cecilia Slatemark's Sweet 16. I blinked. Then blinked again. What? I leaned back, rubbing my temple. That is unexpected. My mother smirked. Is it really? I hesitated. No, I admitted. Not really. She laughed. At least you're aware. My father, ever the practical one, crossed his arms. We're not nobles. Why would we be invited to something like this? Arya giggled. Because Arthur's her favorite. I shot her a look, but she just stuck her tongue out at me. Mother nodded in agreement, barely containing her amusement. It's clearly because of you, dear. The princess must be quite fond of you. I sighed. Cecilia's persistent. She's interested, my mother corrected, a knowing smile playing at her lips. I didn't deny it. I was more than aware of Cecilia's feelings. She was never subtle about them. Not even a little. Well, my father said after a moment, if we're going, we'll need to prepare. Oh. Arya nearly bounced out of her chair. I need a dress. I groaned, already picturing the extravagant event ahead. This was going to be something. Chapter 185, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 2. Considering it was Cecilia's 16th birthday, the entire world seemed determined to put on a show. The Slatemark Empire had spared no expense, the palace practically glowing with gold and crimson banners fluttering against the night sky. The security was tight, guards stationed at every entrance, their sleek exosuits glinting under the artificial lighting, mana-powered drones hovering just out of sight, scanning the incoming guests. A celebration, yes, but not without its precautions. The slate marks weren't the only ones under scrutiny. Every noble house worth its name had sent a delegation. The Creightons, the Windwards, the Viserians, the Ashbluffs, all of them had made an appearance. Even the Namgung family from the eastern continent had arrived, their presence an unmistakable declaration of interest. And me? I was here as both a participant and an observer. Because soon enough, it wouldn't just be Cecilia's birthday being celebrated, it would be the Crown Prince's 18th. Valerian Slatemark. A character who, despite his royal title, was little more than a footnote in the grand scheme of history. Not particularly talented, not particularly brilliant, and most crucially, not a student of Mythos Academy. His failure to gain admission had been a quiet scandal, one his family had rushed to smother, claiming he had never intended to apply in the first place. Instead, he attended Slatemark Academy, where he languished in mediocrity, overshadowed by younger talents, by Cecilia, by the rising stars of his generation, by everyone. And that made him dangerous. The coup that would result from his desperate actions would fracture the empire, leaving wounds so deep they would never fully heal. His paranoia would turn even those who loved him against him. His failure would cost not just his throne, but his world. Because while the Slatemark Empire waged war against itself, the demons would be watching. Waiting. They had plans for Earth. Plans that hinged on the moon base, humanity's last line of defense against an invasion. The fortress floating above them, buried deep in lunar rock, housed an artifact the demons had been searching for across countless worlds. And when Valerian's coup shattered the Empire's unity, the base would fall. The demons would claim their prize. And then the war would truly begin. I wasn't about to let that happen. And the first step? Navigating this damn banquet. It wasn't just a party, it was a battlefield, one where words were sharper than swords, alliances were forged over wine, and every smile hit a dagger. More than just the established noble houses, the prodigies of Slatemark Academy would be here as well. Leora Arundel, the future Ice Empress, a mage who would one day turn entire battlefields into frozen wastelands. Tobias Grimfeld, the Titan of Slatemark, a dark mage with a reputation for overwhelming brute force. Naomi Draven, the Mist Enchantress, unparalleled in illusion magic. And Alara Astoria, the Veil of Grace, her healing magic capable of turning the tide of wars. Each of them had the potential to change the future. And then there was him. Jack Blaze Spout. Even now, just thinking about him sent a chill down my spine. The man who, in another timeline, had annihilated the Slatemark Academy, then the Viserian family, then anyone who dared to stand in his path. Unlike the others, his fate was already written in blood. A wielder of both Nirvana flames and abyssal flames, his soul entwined with a legendary great artifact that had devoured the will of the heavenly demon himself. A monster in human skin. A being so powerful that even the Radiant rank warriors of the world hesitated to confront him in the future. The one called the Third Calamity, Hellflame Emperor in the novel. Tonight, he would just be another noble son, blending into the crowd, smiling, speaking in polite tones. But I knew better. This banquet wasn't just a celebration. It was an opportunity, to observe, to strategize, to ensure that when the time came, I would be ready. With that thought, I turned to the mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored black suit, the silver embroidery catching the light. The nightingale crest, a stylized silver bird in flight, was stitched subtly into my collar. It was formal enough for a noble gathering, practical enough to move in should things go sideways. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. My father stepped in first, his gaze sweeping over me with the careful assessment of a man who had spent decades in high society. He nodded approvingly. "You look ready." "Thanks," I said, offering a small smile. Behind him, my mother entered, dressed in a shimmering midnight blue gown, her elegance effortless as always. Arya, my sister, wore a similar dress, her eyes filled with excitement at the grandeur of it all. "You look handsome, Arthur," my mother said warmly, adjusting my collar just slightly. "Remember, this is a celebration. Try to enjoy yourself." I nodded. I will, Mom. The words were easy enough to say. But I knew the truth. This wasn't just a celebration. This was the beginning of the next chapter. As we stepped outside, the sleek black car bearing the Minerva insignia awaited us, its surface reflecting the towering skyline of the imperial city. The journey to the palace was smooth, the streets meticulously maintained, the city humming with the presence of high-ranking officials, dignitaries, and nobles. By the time we arrived, the palace was already bathed in golden light, the crimson banners of the Slate Mark Empire rippling in the evening breeze. Security was tight. Guards in ceremonial clothes stood at the entrance, their helmets sleek, their weapons charged but holstered. High above, drones flitted across the sky, scanning each incoming guest. The car came to a slow stop, and a guard stepped forward, opening the door. My father stepped out first, then my mother, then Arya. Finally, I followed, adjusting my suit as my gaze swept across the sea of noble guests already arriving. The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the faint clinking of glasses. The scent of fine wines, rare perfumes, and the polished stone of the palace grounds filled the air. And then, as the doors of the grand hall loomed before me, I took a breath. This was the beginning of Cecilia's birthday banquet. The Slate Mark Imperial Palace wasn't just a building, it was a statement. A declaration of power, wealth, and history woven seamlessly with cutting-edge technology. Unlike the castles of old, where grandeur was often synonymous with impractical excess, this palace was the perfect blend of timeless elegance and modern efficiency. Every inch of the structure was a deliberate masterpiece, a marriage of traditional craftsmanship and futuristic innovation. Discreet security measures were woven into the very fabric of the walls, holographic mana barriers, hidden surveillance drones that floated silently in the air, and defensive wards disguised as decorative engravings. Even the lighting, soft and ambient, adjusted in real time to complement the setting, subtly shifting to highlight important areas without overwhelming the palace's regal atmosphere. As I walked down the expansive hallway, the polished marble floors reflected the glow of the chandeliers overhead. The walls were lined with massive tapestries, their woven threads infused with a faint luminescence, depicting battles that shaped the Slate Mark Empire's rise. One in particular caught my eye. It was impossible to ignore. The massive tapestry dominated the hallway, stretching nearly from floor to ceiling. At its center stood a lone man, his presence towering over the battlefield he commanded. He was clad in armor that shimmered with an ethereal glow, his golden blonde hair cascading past his shoulders like a lion's mane. Around him, chaos raged, blades clashed, storms roared, fire and lightning split the heavens, but none of it touched him. Julius Slate Mark. The first radiant rank. The founder of the Slate Mark Empire. The man who shaped history not through conquest alone, but through sheer, undeniable presence. His gift, Empyrean order, made it so that everything bent to his will. He wasn't merely a warrior, he was a force of nature wrapped in the skin of a man. The scene captured him at his peak, standing at the heart of a battlefield, unshaken as elemental forces swirled around him. Firestorms crashed against invisible barriers, lightning arced and froze midair, blades shattered before even reaching his skin. He commanded not just people, but the very world itself. I stopped, staring at the tapestry longer than I intended. Something about it stirred something in me, a sense of inevitability, like I was standing at the precipice of a revelation I wasn't quite ready to grasp. Then I felt it. A warmth, subtle yet unmistakable, pulsing from my arm. Beneath the fabric of my sleeve, the sigils of lucent harmony flickered to life, as if responding to something unseen. And then, a voice. Soft. Wistful. Echoing in my mind like a memory surfacing after centuries of silence. Julius. It's been so long since I last saw him. Luna. My breath caught for a moment. She knew him. Of course she did. Julius Slate Mark had wielded lucent harmony before me. He had been the one to carry Luna's will before she ended up in my hands. 1,000 questions crashed into my mind, but only one managed to take form. If he had both Empyrean order and lucent harmony, wouldn't that have made him unstoppable? Julius wasn't the only one in history to possess two gifts. I knew of two others, Lucifer Windward, the supposed child of prophecy, and Jack Blaze Spout, the future Hellflame Emperor and third calamity. But technically, Julius' second ability wasn't a gift in the traditional sense. Lucent harmony wasn't something he was born with, it was a beast's will. And yet, functionally, it acted just like a gift. Which led me to a question the novel had never answered. Why could only certain people wield two gifts while the rest of humanity was stuck with one? Lucifer hadn't obtained Luna's will in the original storyline, likely because it would have been his third gift. And if that was impossible, then logic dictated that two was the absolute limit. But why? If obtaining multiple beast wills was even remotely possible, then surely at least one of the Radiant Rankers would have figured it out by now. Yet none had. The answer wasn't in the books, nor was it in any known records. Julius. Lucifer. Jack. Were they simply anomalies? Outliers whose very existence defied the rules? I exhaled slowly, tearing my gaze away from the tapestry. The realization sat heavy in my chest. There were still too many things I didn't understand. Chapter 186, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 3. With a breath that did little to steady my nerves, I followed my parents and sister through the towering double doors of the banquet hall. Instantly, we were swallowed by a tide of warmth, laughter, and the soft hum of stringed instruments weaving through the air. The sheer opulence of the room threatened to overwhelm the senses. Golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished marble floors, and the scent of aged wine and expensive perfume mingled with the crisp coolness of manna-infused air. The nobility of the Slate Mark Empire moved like a well-rehearsed symphony, dressed in garments spun from wealth itself. Gowns shimmered as though woven from stardust, and suits were tailored with an elegance that spoke of old money and older ambition. Conversations flowed like fine liquor, pleasant and polite on the surface but undoubtedly laced with 1,000 undercurrents of scheming and silent rivalries. My father leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Arthur, we will greet the princess first. Formalities must be observed." I inclined my head in understanding, though my focus was already being pulled in several directions. The sheer weight of the room pressed against me, a suffocating wave of manna that hummed through the air like a tangible force. It wasn't just the presence of nobles and socialites. No, this gathering held something far more formidable. I let my senses stretch, picking up on the impossible depths of mana signatures clustered throughout the hall. Immortal rankers. More than I've ever sensed in one place. They stood in quiet conversations, their power concealed beneath layers of restraint, but to those who could feel it, their presence was like standing in the eye of a storm. Dozens of ascendant rankers filled the spaces between, their auras like crackling embers compared to the infernos of the immortals. And scattered throughout the hall, Imperial Knights stationed for security remained still as statues, living weapons, waiting for the slightest shift in danger. The air thickened as a sudden hush swept across the room. The chatter stilled, laughter choked into silence, and all attention snapped toward the entrance as a deep, commanding voice rang out, announcing the arrival of the imperial family of the Slate Mark Empire. Like clockwork, the nobility turned in unison, their practiced smiles giving way to polite reverence. The grand doors at the far end of the hall opened, revealing the figures who ruled over the mightiest empire on the central continent. Emperor Quinn Slatemark strode forward first, his mere presence enough to command absolute attention. He was a man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders and did so without flinching. His robes, embroidered with ancient sigils of authority, caught the light as he moved, and his sharp gaze swept across the room like a blade, measuring the worth of every soul present. At his side, Empress Adeline exuded a quiet grace, her expression unreadable but her gaze knowing. She carried herself like someone who saw everything, a woman who understood the subtle language of power better than anyone in the room. Crown Prince Valerian followed, his face a careful mask of composure. He was the image of a perfect heir, poised, confident, and yet, not at ease. There was a stiffness in his shoulders, a flicker of unease behind his otherwise impeccable demeanor. Not a fan of these gatherings, then, I noted. And then, there was her. Cecilia Slatemark walked with an ease that suggested she had been born for moments like this, because, of course, she had. The princess of the empire, the prodigy, the one whose very name carried weight far beyond these halls. Her crimson gown clung to her with effortless elegance, the fabric moving like liquid fire with every step. Unlike her brother, she carried no visible discomfort, though I caught the faintest flicker of amusement in her gaze as her eyes met mine for the briefest of moments. She gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement, so subtle that most wouldn't have even noticed. But I did. The imperial family made their way to the raised platform at the far end of the hall, their thrones a declaration of power more than mere seating. The moment they settled, the tension in the air coiled even tighter, like a string wound to the edge of snapping. Then, the herald spoke again. The first to present their greetings, representatives of the great superpowers of the world. A ripple of movement spread through the grand hall, a slow but undeniable shift in the air as the true powers of the world stepped forward. It was not just a formal procession, it was a quiet declaration, a careful game of measured steps and veiled intentions. The first to move were the Windwards. Lucifer Windward walked with the unshakable composure of someone who had long accepted that the world was his to conquer. His stride was deliberate, his bow to the Emperor and Empress measured to the precise degree expected of a prince of the North. His uncle, speaking for the family, delivered their congratulations with the ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. There was no flourish, no excess, just a smooth and practiced performance of power wrapped in etiquette. The Creightons followed next, led by Rachel Creighton, her every movement a study in controlled grace. Her polite smile was unwavering, polished to perfection, revealing nothing more than what she intended. Beside her, her older sister, Kathleen Creighton, spoke for their family. The warmth in her words felt genuine, but this was the Creighton family, masters of diplomacy, architects of the magic that ruled the world. Even sincerity, when it came from them, was a carefully honed weapon. Then came the Ashbluffs. Gene Ashbluff walked with the quiet intensity that never quite left him, his sharp gaze flickering toward the imperial family before he offered his bow. His mother spoke, her voice clear and firm, a subtle assertion that though the Ashbluffs ruled from the shadows, they were not to be overlooked. The Viserians stepped forward, their presence like a slow-burning fire. Ian Viserion bowed, his golden red hair catching the light, his expression unreadable. Dragons did not bow easily, but the Viserians knew when to honor tradition. His uncle's voice carried the deep, steady cadence of his ancestors, words respectful yet tinged with the unmistakable pride of a family that had never known submission. From the east, the Mount Hua sect entered the fold. Seraphina Zenith, her silver hair a gleaming contrast to the dark robes of her sect, moved with the effortless fluidity of a swordswoman raised in discipline. She bowed with impeccable grace, while beside her, Lee Zenith, the second strongest in the sect, spoke for them. His words were few, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. Mount Hua was not a political player in the same way as the others, yet their presence alone was enough to demand respect. The Kagu family followed, their footsteps silent but deliberate. Ren Kagu bowed with the cool detachment that had become his signature, his expression betraying no emotion. His father, however, was all eloquence, his voice a smooth and calculated force as he congratulated the princess. The Kagu family had little need for dramatics, Ren's mere presence was enough. The violet eyes of the boy who saw everything lingered on Cecilia for a fraction too long before he straightened once more. With the dominant superpowers having played their part, the next to approach was Archduke Astoria and his daughter, Elara Astoria. The Archduke carried himself with the effortless dignity of old nobility, his voice measured, his words perfectly placed. Elara, ever composed, bowed with the sincerity of someone who had no interest in playing politics but understood the necessity of the act. Duke Blaispout followed, his presence carrying a quiet storm beneath its surface. His son, Jack Blaispout, mirrored his father's intensity, though his mask of politeness was carefully worn. Jack bowed smoothly, his sharp gaze lingering longer than necessary, as though memorizing every detail of the imperial family's expressions. The Duke's words were steady, his tone the kind that suggested he saw this as a mere formality before the real negotiations began. Then came Marquis Arundel with his daughter, Leora Arundel. Leora's presence was one of effortless elegance, her expression neutral but alert. She bowed with the ease of someone well-versed in courtly customs, her father's voice a quiet but firm addition to the chorus of greetings. Marquis Grimfeld and his son, Tobias Grimfeld, followed shortly after. Tobias, broad-shouldered and exuding confidence, bowed deeply, his father delivering a perfectly diplomatic speech. Their presence was solid but unremarkable, blending into the sea of noble families that followed. As the line of esteemed figures continued, more names entered the fold: Callie Luna and the Luna family, Naomi Draven with Count Draven. Naomi's sharp eyes flickered with curiosity as she observed the proceedings before bowing, her father speaking with careful reverence. The hall filled with the practiced pleasantries of nobility, words of congratulations blending into one another, their underlying currents known only to those well-versed in courtly games. And then, at long last, it was our turn. Chapter 187, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 4. "Come, Arthur," my father said, his voice carrying a note of quiet bewilderment as he gestured toward the raised platform. "Apparently, we're making our introductions." That was unusual. I could see the slight furrow in his brow, the way his fingers twitched at his side, a rare tell of surprise. House Nightingale, for all its history, was not even a noble house. In the grand hierarchy of the empire, we were respectable but unremarkable, our name holding weight but not enough to justify this kind of attention. Typically, only counts and above were expected, allowed, even, to formally greet the imperial family during events like this. Yet, here we were, summoned forward in front of a room full of people who very much noticed the irregularity. I followed him, my mother gliding beside us, her expression perfectly composed, though I could see the calculation in her eyes. The room quieted slightly as we moved. Conversations didn't stop entirely, but they softened, like everyone had just collectively leaned in a little closer to listen without being obvious about it. We reached the base of the platform where Emperor Quinn Slatemark and Empress Adeline sat with the practiced ease of rulers who knew their presence alone commanded the room. Beside them, dressed in deep red silk embroidered with arcane silver patterns, sat Cecilia Slatemark, the reason for the evening's celebrations. My parents bowed deeply, and I followed suit, inclining my head just enough to convey respect without looking servile. "Your Imperial Majesties," my father said, his voice steady but edged with a certain crispness that only I would notice. "It is an honor for the Nightingale family to be present on this joyous occasion. We extend our sincerest congratulations to Princess Cecilia." A perfectly polite statement, neutral, offering respect but asking for nothing in return. The Emperor nodded, his gaze sharp as he regarded my father. "We are pleased to have you here, Lord Nightingale. Your family's service to the Empire has been noted and appreciated." That was another surprise. Appreciated? Not valued, not acknowledged, words that would have kept the pleasantries cold and distant. This was a step above that. The Emperor didn't waste words. My mother stepped forward smoothly, presenting a small, exquisitely wrapped gift. "A humble token for the princess, Your Majesty," she said, her voice effortlessly graceful. "May this day be filled with joy." Empress Adeline accepted the gift with a gracious smile, her sharp eyes taking in my mother with the kind of silent appraisal that rulers mastered. "Thank you, Lady Nightingale," she said, her voice warm but unreadable. And then, Cecilia spoke. "Arthur," she said, and there it was, the shift in the room, subtle but immediate. The way the surrounding nobles paid closer attention, the way my father, despite his years of political experience, went very still for a fraction of a second. "It's good to see you." There was familiarity in her tone. A softness, even. I met her gaze and bowed once more. "Thank you, Your Highness. It is an honor to be here for your special day." She studied me for a lingering moment, the faintest smile playing at her lips, like she knew exactly what she was doing by acknowledging me so openly. "I hope you enjoy the festivities tonight. Please, feel free to partake in the celebration." I nodded, stepping back in measured deference as my parents concluded their greetings. The moment we turned away, I felt the eyes on us, the ripple of curiosity spreading through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations resumed, but they had taken a new shape, shifting to the unexpected scene they had just witnessed. After all, for all the distinguished guests in attendance, it wasn't a high-ranking duke or a visiting dignitary that Princess Cecilia had personally welcomed with warmth. It was me. My mother's smile was warm as she adjusted the hem of my jacket, her hands lingering just a moment too long, as if she wasn't quite ready to let me go. "Arthur, Arya, have fun," she said, stepping back with a nod of approval. My father, ever the quieter of the two, merely gave a curt nod, though I caught the way his gaze lingered, a silent reminder to behave. Arya, standing beside me in a frilly dress that she had clearly picked out for maximum twirlability, tugged at my sleeve with barely contained excitement. "Arthur, can we meet your celebrity friends again?" I sighed, ruffling her hair just enough to earn a glare. "Sure. If you aren't annoying." "I'm never annoying," she declared, hands on her hips, radiating the same confidence that somehow ran in the family. Before I could deliver a much-needed reality check, a flicker of gold caught my eye. A blur, moving fast, a presence I would recognize anywhere. Rachel. She was in front of me before I could even straighten up, her deep sapphire eyes locking onto mine, the faintest flush on her cheeks. "Finally found you." Her voice was soft, just for me, carrying the warmth of someone who had waited too long. Her lips curled into a smile, and the weight of her absence suddenly settled over me. "I missed you, Arthur." My heart stuttered. Rachel turned to Arya, greeting her with the same easy warmth, and Arya, being Arya, practically preened at the attention. And then another presence. Serafina, appearing as quietly as the falling snow, her silver hair cascading down her shoulders like woven moonlight. "Hey, Sarah," I greeted her with a smile. She simply looked at me, her expression as composed as ever, but I caught the subtle way the corners of her lips lifted. "Oh my God," Arya gasped, clutching my sleeve. "You know Princess Serafina Zenith." Serafina regarded her with polite interest. "Nice to meet you." Arya, meanwhile, was vibrating with barely concealed excitement. The contrast was almost comical. Then, out of nowhere, another voice. "Hey, Arthur." "Been a few days," Rose said, materializing as if she had been there the entire time. I exhaled slowly. "Rose." And just like that, it began. "Arthur, my sister wanted to meet you," Rachel announced. "Arthur, my uncle wanted to meet you again," Serafina added immediately after. "Arthur, my father wanted to meet you," Rose followed, as if we were playing some twisted game of social tug-of-war. The three of them paused, realizing they had all spoken at once. A quiet, almost imperceptible tension settled between them. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Arya covering her mouth, eyes gleaming with the sort of amusement only a younger sibling could have when witnessing her older brother's suffering. I sighed. Loudly. But before I could even attempt to maneuver my way out of the inevitable diplomatic minefield, the music shifted. A gentle melody, the kind that signaled the beginning of the evening's formalities, faded into something grander, something structured. The first dance of the night. The massive hall fell silent. The imperial family sat at the highest tier, their presence commanding attention without a word. At their center, Emperor Quinn stood, raising a single hand for silence. The murmurs of the gathered elites, dignitaries, and prodigies from across the world hushed instantly. Then, with a nod, the emperor's gaze fell on his daughter. Cecilia Slatemark stood, her movements fluid, effortless, like someone who had been born to command a room. There was an unspoken expectation hanging in the air, that she, as the princess, would lead the first dance. It was an honor, a tradition steeped in significance. Whispers rippled through the crowd as she descended the steps, the rhythmic click of her heels echoing in the vast space. Who would she choose? Every eligible noble's son, every heir worth their title, straightened slightly, anticipation written on their faces. To be chosen by the princess for the first dance was more than just a fleeting moment of prestige, it was a statement. Then, in one elegant movement, Cecilia turned toward me. Her scarlet eyes locked onto mine, filled with mischief, amusement, and just a hint of challenge. "Arthur Nightingale," she called, her voice clear, unwavering, and loud enough for every single soul in the hall to hear. A collective breath held. "Would you honor me with the first dance?" I blinked. The silence stretched unbearably long. Then, from somewhere behind me, Aria's barely restrained laughter broke through the tension. Chapter 188, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 5. "Are you not surprised?" Cecilia asked as we moved across the floor, the grand hall's lights casting a soft glow over us. "No," I said simply, leading her in a smooth turn. She had chosen me, as I knew she would. It was obvious, really. Cecilia studied me, her crimson eyes gleaming with mischief. "Your acting is really good, you know," she mused. "If I wasn't as good at reading people as I am, I'd never be able to tell what's really going on in that head of yours." I twirled her, the hem of her gown sweeping the polished floor like a crimson wave. Her smile never faltered. When I first arrived in this world, I had been careful with Cecilia. Not because she was an enemy, no. She was always meant to be a major character on the side of good, but because of how she operated. Cecilia Slatemark crushed people. Not out of malice, but because it was fun for her. She enjoyed the game, the power, the way people struggled under her influence. She was a princess, after all. That meant she had the leverage to get whatever she wanted, and most people never dared to defy her. And if they did, she crushed them harder. Back then, I couldn't afford to stand against her outright. Intelligence and knowledge meant nothing in the face of sheer, overwhelming power. Knowing the future only got you so far when someone like Cecilia could dictate yours with a single command. So I played along. I maneuvered carefully, dodging her traps, using Rachel whenever possible to keep myself from being cornered. I played into her whims just enough to stay afloat, but never enough to drown. But now, I didn't need to do that. I led her into a sweeping dip, her blonde hair cascading down, her teasing smirk never wavering. "I want your eyes only on me, Arthur," she whispered, the weight of her words pressing into the space between us. "Not just for tonight, but always. Look at me, only me." She pulled herself closer, her breath warm against my neck. "Forget the rest of the world," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the whisper of music weaving through the air. "Just this once." And for a moment, I did. The weight of expectation, of battle, of everything beyond this dimly lit ballroom, none of it mattered. Not when Cecilia stood so close, the scent of something soft and elusive lingering in the space between us. Not when her hand rested lightly against mine, her fingers cool, yet firm, as if holding on to something fragile. I didn't resist. There was no need to. Because in the end, Cecilia had never tried to hurt me. Thus, this, whatever this was okay. Her eyes gleamed with something unreadable, something almost hesitant, yet she smiled. Not the teasing smirk she always wore when she toyed with others, nor the sharp glint of mischief she so often directed at me. This smile was quieter, something softer beneath the layers of arrogance and power. "Arthur," she said, voice steady despite the way her grip tightened, "I'm glad you're coming to the Tower of Magic." A pause. "I want to spend time with you." It was strange, how easily she could unsettle me, not with her usual antics, but with sincerity. I exhaled, letting my hands settle properly against hers. "I thought you were the one always running off and doing your own thing." "That's different." She tilted her head, a lock of golden hair slipping over her shoulder as we moved together in a slow turn. "That's for fun. This is." She hesitated. "This is something I actually want." The music swelled around us, each note measured and deliberate, echoing the unspoken tension in the space between us. We moved in sync, her leading sometimes, me leading others, but neither ever truly taking control. It was like a negotiation in motion, each step testing the limits of the other, seeing how much the other would yield. For all her wit and charm, Cecilia was a warrior in spirit. A schemer. A tactician. She didn't submit, not truly. And yet, she trusted me enough to match my pace. I let my grip on her waist tighten just slightly, guiding her through a turn. Her breath hitched almost imperceptibly before she caught herself, her smirk returning in full force. "I see you've been practicing," she mused, twirling back into my arms with a grace that made it look effortless. "Trying to impress someone?" "Just keeping up with you," I replied evenly. "You flatter me, Arthur," she purred, but there was an edge of real amusement in her tone. The song reached its final measures, the last few notes lingering as I slowed our movements. Her fingers curled slightly against my palm, lingering in the moment as the last echoes of the music faded into silence. The world settled around us again, heavier than before. Cecilia sighed, her gaze flickering downward for the briefest moment before she met my eyes again. "I meant what I said," she murmured, her voice losing its teasing lilt. "I'll never hurt you, Arthur." I blinked. "I know that." "No," she said firmly. "Not just that. I won't let anyone else hurt you, either." Something flickered across her expression, something dangerous and unwavering. "If they try," she said, voice dropping to something softer, darker, "I'll crush them." I stared at her for a long moment, unsure whether to take her words as a joke or a declaration. But when I looked into her eyes, I realized she wasn't joking. Cecilia twirled out of my grasp, her scarlet dress catching the light in a shimmer of silk and magic. The moment she released my hands, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Dancing with Cecilia was like balancing on the edge of a blade, thrilling, dangerous, and requiring absolute focus. I watched as she sauntered off with a smirk, eyes gleaming with something between amusement and satisfaction. It was hard to tell if she'd been enjoying herself or simply enjoying my discomfort. Maybe both. "She's terrifying," I thought, rolling my shoulders to shake off the tension. "But it's nice to have her at my side." The music shifted, flowing into a softer melody, and before I could even take another breath, a warm, delicate hand slid into mine. "Rachel." She looked radiant under the festival lights, her golden hair woven into an intricate braid, sapphire eyes shimmering with something I couldn't quite name. Unlike Cecilia, who danced as if she were leading a battle campaign, Rachel moved with effortless grace, a natural rhythm that made me feel like I belonged in the moment rather than fighting to keep up. "You seem relieved," she teased, her lips curling into a playful smile. "Dancing with Cecilia is like trying to navigate a battlefield," I admitted, letting her guide me through the first steps. Rachel laughed, the sound light and melodic. "She is a battlefield, you mean?" I huffed a quiet chuckle, letting her spin under my arm before catching her waist again. "You're a much better partner." "Oh?" She raised a brow. "You mean I don't make you feel like you're about to die?" "That too." She laughed again, but this time there was something softer beneath it, something warm. We moved together, the dance easy, effortless, like breathing. I caught the way her gaze flickered across my face, like she wanted to say something but thought better of it. Instead, she just held on a little tighter as the music slowed, the last few steps dragging out longer than necessary. "Thank you for this," she whispered. And then, just like that, the song ended, and she stepped away. I barely had time to process the shift before another hand reached for mine, smaller, cooler, like a whisper of frost against my skin. "Serafina." She looked up at me, expression unreadable as always, but there was a quiet softness to her silver eyes, something calmer than the usual stoicism she carried. Her dress was a shade of blue so pale it was almost white, flowing like mist with every movement. "You don't like crowds," I murmured as I took her hand. "No," she admitted, allowing me to lead. "But I don't dislike this." That was as close to a compliment as I'd ever get from Serafina. She moved with precision, each step calculated and controlled, as if she were performing a sword form rather than a dance. There was an elegance to it, an underlying strength hidden in the fluidity of her movements. "You're tense," I noted, guiding her through a slow turn. She blinked, looking almost startled before lowering her gaze. "I don't do this often." "Dancing?" "Being close to people." I didn't press her on it. Instead, I just adjusted our pace, making it easier for her to follow, letting her settle into the rhythm at her own pace. After a few moments, she exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing. And for the first time that night, she moved with me instead of merely beside me. The song ended, and she hesitated for just a second before stepping away. "Thank you," she murmured. I gave her a small nod, watching as she retreated into the crowd. One left. I turned just in time for Rose to step forward, her usual gentle smile in place. Unlike the others, she didn't wait for me to extend a hand, she simply took it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You look exhausted," she said, eyes twinkling with amusement. "Cecilia happened," I sighed. "That explains it." Rose's dance was different from all the others. She didn't move with the precision of Serafina or the confidence of Rachel. She simply flowed, like a quiet river, moving to the music in a way that felt entirely effortless. "You're good at this," I noted. I grew up in a noble house, remember?" She smiled, though there was something distant in her eyes. "Lots of banquets. Lots of dancing. It's expected." The way she said it, like it was more obligation than enjoyment, made me frown slightly. "Do you like it?" She blinked, surprised by the question, then let out a soft chuckle. "With the right person, maybe." I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't say anything at all. We just moved together, the dance slow and steady, a quiet rhythm that didn't demand anything beyond the moment itself. And then the music stopped. Rose stepped back, looking at me for just a second longer than necessary before letting go. "Thanks for the dance, Arthur." And then, like the others, she was gone. I exhaled. The festival continued around me, the energy of the crowd buzzing with celebration, but for a moment, I just stood there, feeling the warmth of the past dances lingering like echoes. This world, this life, it wasn't what I had expected. But maybe, just maybe, it was better. Right, Emma? Chapter 189, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 6. After finishing my dances with Serafina, Rachel, and Rose, I finally had a moment to breathe. That moment, however, didn't last long, because my attention was quickly drawn to a group of 5 students standing together, radiating an air of confidence that suggested they were quite used to people staring. They were the pride of Slate Mark Academy, the second best academy in the world, second only to Mythos Academy, which, as a proud student, I naturally believed was the superior one. Rank 1, Jack Blaze-Spout. Rank 2, Leora Arundel. Rank 3, Tobias Grimfeld. Rank 4, Naomi Draven. Rank 5, Elara Astoria. These weren't just any students. Each one of them had a gift, an ability that set them apart from the average elite, making them comparable in strength to my own Class 1A at Mythos Academy. And standing at the top of them all was Jack Blaze-Spout. Jack wasn't just a prodigy, he was the heir to Duke Blaze-Spout, one of the world's most powerful immortal rankers. That alone was enough to command respect. But there was something more. Something that very few people knew. Jack Blaze-Spout wasn't just some noble-born genius. His story was one woven into the annals of fate itself, tied to an ancient nightmare, a shadow of Miriam's past that had clawed its way into the present. Nearly 2 centuries ago, there had been a figure known only as the Heavenly Demon, an apostle of the Demon Overlord, a man who had risen to the pinnacle of radiant rank and founded the Heavenly Demon sect. His reign had been short, but apocalyptic. Miriam had burned under his rule, and the war that followed had claimed countless lives. Among the fallen was the great Liam Kagu, one of humanity's most celebrated warriors. In his final moments, with his physical form failing and his enemies closing in, the Heavenly Demon had attempted to cheat death itself. He had condensed his entire existence, his soul, his power, his very essence, into a single object, a legendary great artifact known as the Orb of Avarice. It was a perfect trap, a flawless snare designed to consume the soul of any who dared to claim it, devouring their being to fuel its own rebirth. It was a brilliant plan. And, like many brilliant plans, it failed spectacularly. The problem? The orb was too powerful, too selective. It refused to bond with just anyone. For years, it sat in the treasury of a minor sect in Murim, its power untapped, waiting for someone worthy. That moment might never have come had it not been for a completely unrelated dispute, one of the many petty conflicts that regularly flared up between Murim's sects and the noble families of the West. The Blazespout family had been involved in one such conflict. They had crushed their enemies, as was their custom, and in the process, they had seized the spoils of war. Among those spoils was the Orb of Avarice. Duke Blazespout had taken one look at the shimmering purple-red sphere and felt the weight of its power pressing against his ambitions. He was already one of the strongest immortal rankers in existence, but it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted the Slate Mark throne. He wanted to ascend beyond immortal rank and break through to radiant rank, a feat that only a handful of people had ever achieved. So he took the orb home. And, to his astonishment, it bonded, not with him, not with any of his seasoned warriors or mages, but with his 2-year-old son. A child. A toddler. No one had ever bonded with a legendary grade artifact at such an age. It was unprecedented. Unnatural. But somehow, impossibly, the Orb of Avarice had chosen Jack Blazespout. And that was when things took an even stranger turn. The Heavenly Demon's grand scheme had been designed to resurrect himself through the artifact. Any normal bearer would have had their soul utterly devoured, their body becoming nothing more than a puppet for the ancient demon's will. But Jack didn't break. Instead of consuming him, the orb bonded with him. Not as a parasite, not as a master overriding its host, but as something akin to a tamed beast. It could whisper to him, tempt him, but it could not control him. The Heavenly Demon, despite all his meticulous planning, had been thwarted by a toddler. And that, ironically, was how humanity's greatest disaster was born. Because while the Heavenly Demon had once burned a continent and left scars on history, Jack Blazespout would go on to do something far worse. One day, he would become the third calamity. The Hellflame Emperor. A name that would cast an even darker shadow than the one who came before him. Jack will set the South ablaze with his flames once he reaches radiant rank. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a certainty, like gravity or the inevitability of someone ruining a perfectly good sandwich by adding raisins. The bond between Jack and the Orb of Avarice didn't just grant him power. It gave him knowledge, the memories and experiences of the Heavenly Demon himself, allowing him to ascend to radiant rank faster than even Lucifer Windward. And when he did, he would devastate the Viserion family, leaving the South in ruins and the world reeling. The novel had stated that Tiamat's claws had pierced his heart, but whether he had truly perished remained a mystery. The kind of mystery that usually ended with the villain returning at the worst possible moment, probably with a new coat and a thirst for vengeance. And now, here he was, the boy who would one day become the Hellflame Emperor, standing before me as just another student. A student pretending to be the perfect noble, all courteous smiles and polished manners, but beneath it was something far less civil. Jack Blazespout wasn't just dangerous because of his strength. He was dangerous because he knew how to wait. Jack had black hair and dark eyes, like Jean Ashbluff, but that was where the similarities ended. Where Jean was composed, refined, the product of careful grooming and aristocratic polish, Jack looked untamed, his hair always slightly unkempt, his posture relaxed but carrying a weight of quiet authority. He had the kind of presence that made people step aside without realizing why, a primal warning wrapped in nobility. Because unlike most nobles, Jack wasn't playing a game. He was waiting for his turn. Jack approached with his entourage in tow. His dark gaze swept over our group before he offered a light bow, every movement precise, deliberate. "It's an honor to see your highnesses gathered here," he said smoothly. His tone was perfectly polite, but there was something else beneath it, an undercurrent of amusement, as if he found the whole thing mildly entertaining. His companions followed suit, bowing in sync. Cecilia responded first, her voice composed but firm. "Good to see you as well, Jack." She gave a polite nod, her expression perfectly schooled as she turned to acknowledge the others from Slate Mark Academy. Her smile was warm but distant, cordial without ever inviting familiarity. Jack straightened, his gaze flicking between us before settling on Lucifer. And just like that, the air between them changed. There was no hostility, no outward aggression. Just tension. The unspoken kind. The kind that hung heavy in the space between two people who knew they would spend their entire lives challenging each other. Lucifer inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Jack. Lucifer, Jack returned, lips curving ever so slightly, almost as if he was enjoying himself. Then, his attention turned to me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of his gaze settle fully. Arthur Nightingale, he said, voice carrying a note of intrigue. It seems fate has brought us all together tonight. Seems so, I replied, keeping my tone even. Congratulations on leading the Slate Mark Academy group. I've heard impressive things about all of you. Naomi Draven stepped forward at that, her eyes narrowing slightly despite the lingering smile on her lips. Impressive? Flattery from a Mythos Academy student? I must say, I didn't expect that. It's not flattery if it's true, I said smoothly, offering a small smile. You've earned your reputation. Jack's expression didn't change, but I caught the faintest quirk of his brow. He found this exchange amusing. Of course he did. To him, this was all a game. A dance of words before the real battles began. Before anything could escalate, Cecilia spoke, her voice gentle yet firm. Tonight is about celebrating, not competing. Let's put aside our differences and enjoy the festivities. Jack's gaze lingered on her for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before he nodded, his smile returning in full force. Of course, Your Highness. We're all here to celebrate, after all. Luna's voice echoed in my mind, filled with something I rarely heard from her, disbelief. Just who the hell is he? She whispered, as if even speaking his name too loudly would make him more real. How is this possible? How can someone harbor so much malice? Luna had lived for thousands of years. She had seen monsters, tyrants, and beings who defied the natural order. And yet, even she was unsettled. Because what Jack carried inside him wasn't just ambition. It was something older. Darker. The heavenly demon had once been a force of unparalleled destruction, and now, that force whispered into the mind of a boy already predisposed to malevolence. Jack Blazespout was one of only two people in the world capable of wielding both mana and miasma. The other was Rin Ashbluff, Jin's hidden twin sister, locked away because the miasma had corrupted her mind. The difference was, Jack wasn't corrupted. Jack was in control. And that made him infinitely more dangerous. Simply put, Jack Blazespout was a character without redemption. And his fate was already set, the only end for him was death. But not today. Killing Jack now wasn't an option. His personal strength aside, he was the heir to Duke Blazespout, a noble with immense influence and resources. Any attempt to kill him would be suicide, and if I died, then everything I was working for would mean nothing. Jack, too, had limits. He couldn't yet wield the full power of his second gift, Abyssal Flames, a miasma-infused flame that had once belonged to the heavenly demon himself. If he revealed it now, it would mark him for execution. And yet, even with only Nirvana flames at his disposal, he was in a league of his own. Lucifer and I were strong. Close in ability. But we weren't there yet. Not at his level. If we fought him now, we would lose. I shifted my gaze away from Jack and toward the group standing behind him. Leora Arundel. Tobias Grimfeld. Naomi Draven. And then, finally, my eyes landed on the one who interested me the most. Elara Astoria. The innocent daughter of Archduke Leopold Astoria. The spark that would one day set the Slatemark Empire on fire. In the novel, Elara's fate had always been a turning point, a moment of tragedy that shattered the stability of an empire. She had been my favorite female character, a symbol of purity caught in the ruthless games of power, a character who had always left me wanting to change the course of the story. And now, she was here. I stepped forward. I was going to ask her to dance. Chapter 190, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 7. Elara Astoria, rank 5 of Slate Mark Academy, was something of an anomaly. Support magic, the art of bolstering others rather than crushing enemies, was often dismissed as outdated, relics of a time when warriors needed healers in the backlands rather than energy shields and nanotech enhancements. Yet, despite this, Elara had dedicated herself to mastering it. Her magic wasn't the kind that made headlines. It didn't split mountains or tear open the sky. It didn't turn entire cities to dust or carve one's name into the annals of history. No, Elara's magic protected, strengthened, mended. Light, earth, wind, water, and space, each one woven together in perfect harmony, allowing her to reinforce allies, manipulate battlefields, and ensure her team could fight harder, longer, and better than they ever could alone. It was a skill set that was underappreciated, but not by those who had ever fought beside her. Of course, her utter lack of offensive magic was a well-known flaw. She had about as much natural talent for attack spells as a fish had for mountain climbing. And yet, despite that, she was still rank 5 of Slate Mark Academy, the second most prestigious academy in the world. A testament to how terrifyingly good she was at what she could do. She had earned her place through raw ability. That was something no one could take away from her. But Elara Astoria, for all her talent, was also, well, painfully kind-hearted. Some would call it naive, others simply a refusal to see the world for what it was. Raised by a father who doted on her after her mother passed during childbirth, she had been sheltered in ways she hadn't even realized. She wasn't spoiled, not by any means, but the world had always seemed a little softer to her. A little kinder. Perhaps that was why she struggled with places like this. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, hands neatly folded, eyes flickering from couple to couple as they twirled and spun to the rhythm of the music. The grand chandeliers above shimmered like starlight, refracting off the polished marble floors, casting an almost ethereal glow over the attendees. The room was a perfect storm of grace, elegance, and politics, and Elara, despite her best efforts, felt like an intruder. She had never quite mastered the subtle art of conversation, the unspoken rules of noble gatherings where every word was measured, where every glance carried meaning. The way people could glide from one conversation to another with effortless charm baffled her. It was overwhelming. It was exhausting. And it made her feel very, very small. Then Arthur Nightingale extended his hand to her. For a second, she just stared. This was Arthur Nightingale. The new rank 1 of Mythos Academy for first years. The boy who had defeated Lucifer Windward, the one everyone assumed would hold that title without contest. A boy who had no business asking her to dance. Her first instinct was to hesitate, her gaze flickering toward the imperial family. The crown prince was watching. The weight of his presence pressed against her thoughts, reminding her of all the unspoken expectations, the delicate balance of alliances and rivalries that noble families danced around like a house of cards. And yet, when she looked back at Arthur, his expression was unreadable. There was no hidden meaning behind the offer, no calculated move in some grand political game. Just an invitation. A simple "would you like to dance?" So she reached out. And placed her hand in his. The moment they stepped onto the dance floor, the noise of the world seemed to fade. Arthur moved with practiced ease, his movements steady, his grip firm but not overbearing. He guided her effortlessly, allowing her to match his steps without fear of misstep. At first, she was stiff, overly focused on her footing, terrified of embarrassing herself. But Arthur was calm. He wasn't leading her into a performance, wasn't expecting her to dazzle or impress. He just danced, and in doing so, he made it easy for her to follow. "You dance well," he said, his voice light and easy, as if they were discussing the weather rather than gliding across the ballroom floor. Elara flushed, not quite believing him, but the sincerity in his voice made her want to try anyway. The tension in her shoulders eased. Her movements became smoother, more natural. She let herself get lost in the music, in the steady rhythm of their steps. She almost forgot the crown prince was still watching. Almost. Her gaze flickered to where he stood, expression unreadable. Anxiety curled at the edges of her mind, whispering doubts, warning her that she was stepping onto fragile ground. But then Arthur spun her gently, and when she met his eyes again, there was something in them that steadied her. It was just a dance. A moment in time. And for now, that moment was enough. Underscore 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 underscore. Cecilia watched Arthur dance with Alara, her fingers tightening ever so slightly around the stem of her glass. Annoying. That was the only word for it. Alara Astoria, the daughter of Archduke Astoria. Cecilia knew her well. Knew her far too well. She was Rachel all over again, kind, warm, radiant in a way that made her impossible to shatter. Not because she was clever, not because she played the game well, but because she simply refused to be broken. It was infuriating. Cecilia could play with people like pieces on a board, twist them, mold them, break them if she wanted to, but not Alara. And now, Alara was dancing with Arthur. Her Arthur. Cecilia exhaled through her nose, forcing herself to relax. I can't be like this, she reminded herself. Arthur won't love me if I act like this. Love required subtlety, patience. Not unchecked possessiveness. She turned her head slightly, her sharp eyes landing on her older brother, Valerian. He wasn't even being discreet about it, his gaze was practically burning holes into Arthur and Alara as they moved across the dance floor. Cecilia's lips curled in irritation. Valerian, she said, her voice light but carrying an unmistakable edge. He flinched, then quickly masked it with a smile. Hey, Cecilia. A weak attempt at feigned nonchalance. Pathetic. She could read him like a book. If she could unravel Arthur's thoughts, Arthur, who was so frustratingly enigmatic, then Valerian was as transparent as glass. You know, she continued, her tone almost conversational, as my brother, I do care about you. There was no warmth in her voice. Valerian stiffened. But I will warn you, she said, her eyes locking onto his. Don't you dare touch Arthur. His expression tightened, but he remained silent. That was a mistake. Cecilia's gaze sharpened, a slow, dangerous smile creeping onto her lips. If you do, I'll make sure you lose everything, she whispered, her voice carrying all the weight of an executioner delivering a verdict. Just keep being the heir to the Slatemark Empire and behave, yeah? Valerian hesitated. Too long. Answer me, she said, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. Why yes, he stammered, the crack in his voice betraying him. Cecilia smiled, pleased. Good thing I broke him before. She turned on her heel, only to feel a pair of sharp, assessing eyes on her. Her father. She sighed, already anticipating a lecture as she approached him. What is it, father? She asked, crossing her arms. Quinn Slatemark studied his daughter, unreadable as always. I noticed your conversation, he said simply. Cecilia arched an eyebrow. So? You shouldn't hurt your brother. She scoffed. I don't care. Quinn's gaze didn't waver. You should. You're the one who taught me, father, she said, tilting her head. Protect what's important. And that person isn't Valerian. It's Arthur. Her father didn't respond immediately, but something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe. Amusement. Cecilia gave him a smirk. So I'll do whatever I wish. After all, she turned, her golden hair catching the light. Isn't that how a true slate mark lives, father? Quinn watched as she walked away, his gaze contemplative. A perfect slate mark. That's what she was. Ruthless, pragmatic, unshakable. He turned his attention to his son, Valerian, the future emperor, who was still stiff with tension, his shoulders tight with the weight of his younger sister's words. Quinn sighed. To think the next emperor could be shaken by his own sister. Then, finally, his gaze shifted to Arthur. A nightingale, he thought. His fingers tapped against the edge of his glass. I wonder if their voice will pierce the skies this generation. Chapter 191, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 8. After finishing my dance with Alara, I decided I was officially done for the night. 5 dances were more than enough, and I wasn't about to push my luck with any more. Alara left with a bright smile, drifting off to join her friends, and Arya had disappeared somewhere as well, likely off causing some kind of chaos with her own group. I was just about to find the girls when I felt a familiar presence approaching. Lucifer windward. His blonde hair was as immaculate as ever, not a single strand out of place, and his emerald eyes still carried that unshakable self-assurance. But there was something missing in them tonight, something just a little off. Arthur, he greeted, voice steady, calm, as if the weight of the world wasn't pressing down on his shoulders. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, something he almost never did. Let's talk in private. I nodded, sending a brief signal to the others that I'd be fine. The girls were watching with varying degrees of concern, and I knew why. Lucifer was proud, unreasonably so. And I had beaten him. That sort of thing didn't sit well with someone like him. But in the end, Lucifer wasn't some comic book villain set on revenge. He was twisted in places, sure, shaped by his childhood into someone who always had to prove his worth, but deep down, he was a good man. And more importantly, he wasn't stupid enough to try anything reckless. He led me to a private chamber just outside the Grand Hall. Being a prince, of course, he had access to rooms even in the heart of the Slate Mark Palace. He stepped inside first, and I followed, shutting the door behind us. You won the bet, Lucifer admitted, his tone even, measured. No frustration, no irritation. Just a statement of fact. He reached into his spatial ring and retrieved something small, placing it in my palm. A ring. I wanted to save you the trouble of visiting the Windward estate, he continued. So I personally picked an artifact for you. I turned the ring in my fingers. It was simple, elegant, with faint engravings that pulsed with the quiet hum of ancient magic. This is an ancient great artifact we had in our vaults, Seraphim's Embrace. It enhances your senses. His expression remained unreadable as he added, I hope this is good enough. If not, you're welcome to visit the Windward Treasury as promised by my father. I turned the ring over once more before slipping it onto my finger, feeling the subtle shift in awareness it granted. Thank you. This is enough, I said simply. An ancient great artifact that boosted my senses? More than good enough. I wasn't about to push my luck by trying to claim the legendary great sword Lucifer would eventually bond with. Lucifer studied me for a long moment, his emerald eyes unreadable. Then, with a quiet exhale, he did something completely unexpected. Thank you for beating me, Arthur. I blinked. What? That wasn't exactly the reaction I'd anticipated. Resentment? Maybe. Determination? Definitely. But gratitude? That was a surprise. I always thought this world was mine, Lucifer said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, something raw. I believed everything would unfold as it should, as if the universe itself had already written my story. But you showed me how wrong I was. Even when everything pointed to my victory, even when I unlocked my second gift in the middle of our fight, I still lost. Your hard work and talent beat me. His words weren't bitter. They weren't even regretful. Just honest. You did achieve something amazing, Arthur. Luna's voice echoed in my mind, her tone carrying that rare note of approval. The one destined for greatness, the future emperor of the world, had his hubris and fate shattered by the one who was fateless. The one I chose. Lucifer exhaled, running a hand through his immaculate hair as he continued. I spent a lot of time alone after that match, thinking. Not just about why I lost, but about everything. My strength. My relationships. Especially with Rachel, who was always there, and I never really saw her. His fingers curled slightly at his sides. I understand now. I was wrong. About so many things. And I want to change. All because of you. He straightened, that old confidence settling back into his posture like an old, well-fitted coat. So, thank you. I met his gaze, nodding. You're welcome, Lucifer. The moment lingered for a beat too long, then he smirked, just a little, just enough for the familiar arrogance to peek through. But don't get comfortable, he added. I won't keep losing forever. I will beat you in the future. So just keep waiting for me at the top. I chuckled, slipping the ancient grade ring onto my finger. I'll be waiting. If you wish to bond with the artifact, feel free to do so, Lucifer said, giving my shoulder a pat. Then, after the briefest hesitation, he added, Anne. I hope we can be friends in the future. That was as close to vulnerable as Lucifer Windward was ever going to get, and I wasn't about to ruin the moment. Sure, I replied, and with a nod, he turned and left, leaving me alone in the room. I glanced down at the artifact in my palm, the ring, Seraphim's embrace. It was small, unassuming, yet the air around it thrummed with power, the way an old engine hums before roaring to life. Ancient great artifacts didn't just sit around gathering dust in noble vaults, they carried weight, history, and in this case, an entire legend wrapped around them like a second skin. Carefully, I pricked my finger with mana, letting a single drop of blood fall onto the ring's surface. Instantly, the metal shivered in my hand. The faint, intricate runes engraved into it pulsed with light, responding to the offering as if drinking it in. And then it hit me. A surge of energy, not violent but overwhelming in its sheer intensity, rushed through me, racing down my spine and seeping into every nerve, every fiber of my being. It was like plugging directly into the heart of a star, but instead of burning, the power simply was. It settled deep in my core, familiar and foreign all at once, an energy that was both mine and something greater. Luna's voice whispered in my mind, steady, reassuring. You have done well, Arthur. The Seraphim's embrace has chosen you. The artifact was now bonded to me. Seraphim's embrace. Legend had it that these were the eyes of a fallen angel, a being cast down from celestial heights, stripped of its divinity but not its power. Whether that was true or just the fevered ramblings of an old historian with a taste for dramatics, I had no idea. But what was true was that stories had weight. Stories were power. And this one, whispered across centuries, repeated and reinforced until it was woven into reality itself, had transformed the artifact into something far beyond just a piece of metal. Ancient great artifacts weren't made in a forge or crafted by mere mortal hands, they were shaped by belief. Had more people known of its tale, had its legend been sung by more tongues, it might have ascended to legendary grade. But that was the nature of things like this. You couldn't force a myth into existence. You couldn't cheat time and belief, not even with the most advanced time magic. Artifacts like this weren't built. They became. Now, its power was mine. I sat on the couch, flexing my fingers as I adjusted to the artifact's effects. Almost immediately, the world around me shifted. Clarity sharpened, edges became crisper, colors deepened, and something I could only describe as awareness settled over me like an extra layer of perception I'd never known I was missing. I could see the delicate shimmer of mana currents in the air, threads of power twisting in patterns too intricate for normal eyes to catch. The tiny imperfections in the wooden floor, the minute distortions in the weave of the curtains, even the soft, rhythmic pulse of distant energy signatures, all of it unfolded before me with perfect, effortless precision. I narrowed my focus towards the window, letting my enhanced sight stretch outward. The cityscape beyond was no longer just a cluster of lights and movement, it was alive, a pulsing web of energy and motion. I could see people moving through the streets below, their mana signatures glowing faintly like fireflies. The hum of technology blended seamlessly with the natural aura of the world, an intricate dance of old and new, magic and machine. This is incredible, I thought, shifting my vision further. Then, an idea. A reckless one, maybe. But I wanted to test something. I reached inside myself and activated Lucent Harmony. The power flared within me instantly, merging with the effects of Seraphim's embrace in a way that sent a shudder through my entire being. My senses expanded again, but this time, it was more than just clarity. The world didn't just come into focus, it unfolded. It was as if I had stepped out of the constraints of normal perception and into something far greater. Details leaped out at me, impossibly sharp. I could see the individual strands in the carpet beneath my feet. The faint residue of magic left behind by Lucifer's presence. The way the air itself shifted and trembled with the unseen forces moving through it. This was more than just heightened sight. This was perception in its purest form. Arthur, Luna's voice cut through my thoughts, her tone carrying a note of warning. I ignored her. I was too fascinated. Was this what Ren felt when he activated his god's eyes? Of course, his power transcended the Seraphim's embrace by an enormous margin, but, with Lucent Harmony added into the mix, maybe, just maybe, I was getting a glimpse of that kind of ability. But something nagged at me. This was borrowed power. A tool, not an inherent ability. And tools could be replicated. Stolen. Countered. Still, power was power. And now, I had more of it. Luna's voice came again, quieter this time. Arthur, be careful. The artifact is immense, but it is not limitless. I could already feel the strain. The exhilaration came with a cost, a subtle, creeping fatigue clawing at the edges of my mind. The artifact wasn't just feeding me perception, it was demanding something in return. I took a slow breath, releasing the power slightly, allowing the world to settle back into something more manageable. Thank you, Luna, I murmured. I'll be careful. For now. Chapter 192, Cecilia's Sweet 16, 9. Lucifer walked out of the room, leaving Seraphim's embrace behind with Arthur. His father's words echoed in his mind. Don't worry, Lucifer. You will surpass him soon enough. After all, you unlocked even a second gift. You are sure to be the destined second hero. Lucifer hadn't said anything to his father at the time. What was there to say? But now, standing in the quiet corridor, looking back at where Arthur had been, at what Arthur had become, Lucifer looked down at his own hands. Second hero? He clenched his fists. I am not worthy. Not because he lacked strength. Not because he lacked talent. No, he had both in abundance. But a hero wasn't someone who wielded power simply because they could. And he had spent so long demanding, expecting, assuming his place at the top. Arthur had done the impossible. He held both White Star and Black Star, a feat that defied everything Lucifer had believed about power. He had created a lich as a mere white ranker. He stood at the center of something far greater than destiny. Lucifer exhaled. He wasn't going to lose this easily. He wouldn't allow himself to. As he stepped into the grand hall, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. For sets of eyes turned in his direction. Seraphina Zenith. Cecilia Slatemark. Rose Springshaper. Rachel Creighton. They were all looking for Arthur, scanning the room with quiet urgency. They thought he had walked in. He hadn't. But Lucifer had. He set his sights on Rachel and moved toward her. She saw him approach, and for the briefest moment, so quick it might have been missed, her expression twisted. A flicker of something raw and unpleasant crossed her face before she smoothed it over into neutrality. But Lucifer had seen it. And it twisted something inside of him. How foolish I was. He remembered the things he had said to her. No, demanded of her. He had told her she was his saintess, that she would stand beside him because he was the second hero. What arrogance. Rachel, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Rachel turned to him, her gaze sharp as a blade. What is it? No warmth. No kindness. Not for him. Lucifer remembered everything, his own words, his own mistakes. How he had once believed killing Arthur was the answer. How Rachel had warned him that he couldn't, not because she feared for Arthur, but because she knew the truth. That Lucifer would lose. And he had. Even unlocking his second gift, it wasn't enough. Arthur had beaten him. Lucifer inhaled deeply and bowed. I'm sorry. Rachel blinked. I am sorry, Rachel, he repeated, forcing himself to meet her gaze. I know this apology isn't enough. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope you won't burden yourself with hatred over someone like me. He smiled, an actual, genuine smile. The kind that didn't hide behind bravado or arrogance. Then he turned to leave. He had taken 2 steps when. Wait. He stopped. Turned. Rachel looked at him, eyes searching, weighing, deciding. I don't forgive you, she said. Lucifer had expected that. He had earned that. But maybe, she continued, her expression shifting, softening just a little, I can. Over time. She held out her hand. Let's be friends, okay? Lucifer looked at the offered hand, then at her face. Her smile was there, but it wasn't his anymore. That warmth in her eyes? That quiet affection that once belonged to him? It was Arthur's now. Lucifer knew. And yet. He wasn't unhappy. He reached out, took her hand, and smiled. Okay. Underscore 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 underscore. Arthur, if you aren't careful, that boy will leave you far in the dust, Luna warned as I stepped out of the room. I know, I replied. And I did. The Lucifer I had fought in the tournament had only just unlocked God's eyes. He had barely scratched the surface of what he was capable of. If we fought again in a month, I wouldn't just lose, I wouldn't stand a chance. And that was before considering his mana rank. Lucifer had reached white rank long before I had, though he'd paid a price for it. His reckless advancement had hurt his soul aspect. But even with that setback, he would still reach integration rank before me. And once he did, I'd be staring at a gap in power that no amount of clever footwork could bridge. I exhaled, ignoring the faint sting of bitterness curling in my chest. He's going to overtake me again, huh? The integration process, the method by which a white ranker ascended to integration rank, was a delicate, brutal transformation. It wasn't just about accumulating power, it was about breaking oneself down and reforging from the inside out. The white mana core had to be shattered, carefully, methodically, so that it could be integrated into the body itself. And that was just stage 1. The first stage of integration was the most dramatic. It tripled both the quality and quantity of mana, essentially rewriting what it meant to wield power. Stage 2. It doubled that again. Stage 3, the final step, the one that truly marked the crossing into integration rank, was another 67% boost. By the time it was over, a freshly ascended integration ranker would have 10 times the mana capacity and potency of a white ranker. And that wasn't just a matter of numbers. It meant enhanced aura rather than normal aura for those using the aura method, a fundamental shift in the way mana interacted with the body. It meant the ability to wield six-circle magic, something entirely beyond the reach of those still shackled to white rank. And Lucifer was about to reach it before me. I flexed my fingers, feeling the weight of that inevitability settle over me. Well, I had to reach integration rank before winter break anyway. It wasn't just about keeping up anymore. Once I reached integration, I'd be able to access more of Erebus's abilities, something I definitely needed if I didn't want to fall behind. Right now, I can only use his gift and treat him like a glorified necromantic skeleton, bone armor at best, I thought, somewhat bitterly. Erebus had power. I just wasn't strong enough to use it properly yet. That would change soon. The party was winding down, the air shifting from grandeur to quiet conversations as the last of the guests lingered. I took the opportunity to talk to the girls a bit more before leaving. "Sarah, can I visit Mount Hua sect?" I asked Seraphina casually. She shrugged, as if letting someone walk into one of the most prestigious sects on the planet was no big deal. "Come whenever you want." That was good. I needed to train my senses further and work on conceptualizing the second movement of my grade 6 art. God Flash was just the beginning, after all. Eventually, the time came to leave. Alongside the girls, I bid farewell to Lucifer, who was still deep in thought, and then made my way to the car with my family. It took exactly 30 seconds of peace before Arya spoke. "Hey, Arthur, I saw you and Lucifer sneaking off into a room together," she said, her voice absolutely dripping with mischief. Then, before I could cut her off, she smirked, a smirk so smug, so dangerous, that a genuine chill ran down my spine. "Were you both?" I clamped a hand over her mouth before she could finish that sentence. "Do not try to change the goddamn genre." I groaned internally. Arya mumbled something indignantly into my palm before I sighed and let her go. "He gave me an ancient grade artifact. I won a bet against the Dark King." That, apparently, was enough to stun my parents. My mother gasped. My father actually turned in his seat to look at me properly. "You won a bet against King Arden Windward," he repeated, as if he had misheard me. I nodded. "He bet that I couldn't beat Lucifer," I said simply. "And I did." Arya crossed her arms, still pouting from being silenced. "You could have let me finish, you know." I ignored her. Some things were simply not worth entertaining. Chapter 193, Seraphina Zenith, 1. "So, what's the amazing news?" I asked, looking between my parents as we sat down for breakfast. Given the way they were practically vibrating with excitement, I assumed it was something important. Or at the very least, something they expected me to find important. "Yes, yes," my father said, his smile so wide it looked like it was about to break free from his face. "Arya managed to get into Slate Mark Academy. We got the acceptance email this morning." My mother beamed. "We're so proud of her." I turned to Arya, who was radiating smug satisfaction. "That's great," I said with a grin. "Congratulations, Arya." "Obviously," she said, nodding as if it was the most natural outcome in the world. Then she shot me a look, half accusing, half exasperated. "But brother, can you not be so amazing? I mean, you even won the title of Sovereign in the greatest year of Mythos Academy. Do you know how many of my friends asked me about you?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "I'm just getting started." And I meant it. Slate Mark Academy had some of the strongest students outside of Mythos, but Mythos was the pinnacle. I wasn't at the top out of sheer luck, I had fought for it. And yet, I knew better than to be complacent. "If I'm not careful, I'll be overtaken," I added, my voice turning a shade more serious. Lucifer was still the biggest threat. And while I was currently ahead of Ren, thanks to Erebus and his gift, that gap could close at any moment. But son, my father cut in, watching me carefully. I was surprised you made a lich. I didn't miss the way my mother tensed slightly. Necromancy had a reputation. Even in an age where technology and magic intertwined seamlessly, there were still some things that made people uncomfortable. How did that happen? I scratched the back of my head, carefully outlining the process, conveniently leaving out certain minor details, such as how I got my hands on a basilisk heart. Some things were better left unsaid. The skull of the Arch-Lich from 2035, my mother murmured under her breath. That got my father's attention. His brows furrowed as he leaned forward. That Arch-Lich decimated a branch of the Adventurers Guild in the northern continent, he said. A branch considered equal to a gold-rank guild here in the Slate Mark Empire. His eyes flickered with something between admiration and concern. You got an amazing item. I did, I agreed, nodding. Though, that didn't mean I was done wringing more out of Alastair. A deal is a deal, I thought, suppressing a smirk. My mother, ever the one to get things back on track, changed the subject. So, you're going to Mount Huasek now? I nodded. I need to train there. About 3 weeks, give or take. Then I'll return for a bit before heading to the Tower of Magic. You could also come to Minerva, my father added, mentioning his guild. Ah, Minerva. A respectable, if somewhat unimpressive, bronze-rank guild. My father was its guild master, a mid-integration ranker, which gave him enough influence to keep it running comfortably. While it wasn't exactly making headlines for world-shattering achievements, it still brought in a steady flow of wealth. I nodded. Yeah. That could be useful. After all, I needed to start laying the groundwork for the future. The Empire was headed for disaster, and I knew exactly how it would unfold. Crown Prince Valerian Slatemark would be engaged to Alara Astoria, a political move meant to solidify alliances. But behind closed doors, Valerian, jealous, insecure, and cruel, would slowly break her. And when Archduke Astoria finally discovered the truth, he wouldn't settle for diplomacy. He would kill the Crown Prince in his rage. That would tear the Slatemark Empire in half, igniting a civil war at the worst possible time. And that war would weaken humanity's hold over its moon base, allowing the demons to seize it effortlessly. I couldn't let that happen. For that, I needed power. A lot of power. And I had an idea of how to get it. The key lay in Etherite, a resource that wouldn't be discovered until much later on the moon. It was a game-changer, a substance that would revolutionize manatech and alchemy, reshaping the very foundations of power. If I could get my hands on Etherite early, before the world even realized its true value, I wouldn't just be strong, I'd be untouchable. I could monopolize the industry before it even began. Of course, this wasn't something that could be rushed. I had plans, long-term ones. Strategies that would take years to execute. But when the time came, when Etherite was finally revealed to the world, I intended to be the only name that mattered. My parents had bought me a ticket to the Eastern continent, and the very next day, I was on a plane, bidding farewell to my sister and parents. It was a quick goodbye. Arya was still sulking over something I'd done, or hadn't done, I wasn't entirely sure, and my mother had given me the kind of look that promised we'll talk later. My father had simply clapped me on the shoulder and told me not to cause an international incident. Solid advice. No guarantees I'd follow it. Stepping off the plane, I took a deep breath, adjusting to the feeling of the East. The mana here was different, sharper, older. It hummed in the air, in the ground, in the bones of the land itself. What I hadn't expected was the welcoming committee. Standing at the terminal, waiting for me, was Seraphina Zenith, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt that, despite its casual simplicity, did absolutely nothing to hide the fact that she looked good. And next to her, my master, Lee Zenith. Well, this was unexpected. I wasn't expecting this, I said, striding towards them. Lee gave me a calm, amused smile, while Seraphina, who had clearly been the instigator of this little airport retrieval mission, looked distinctly unimpressed with my lack of reaction. "Hello, Master," I greeted, offering a respectful bow. "Hello, Arthur," he said, his smile widening ever so slightly. Then he tilted his head towards Seraphina. "And this one nagged me to come pick you up." "I didn't nag," Seraphina said immediately, crossing her arms. "I just suggested we pick him up." "1,000 times," Lee added, as if making an objective observation about the weather. Seraphina's eyes narrowed into very clear warning slits. Lee, entirely unfazed, looked between the two of us. And then he just stood there. Expectantly. As if something was supposed to happen. He waited. We waited. Finally, he sighed. "Come on. Aren't you going to hug?" Seraphina blinked, looking deeply taken aback, as if the very concept had never once crossed her mind. I held back a laugh. "Barely." She turned to me, pursing her lips, clearly debating whether to commit to this insanity or not. Then, after a long, suffering sigh, she opened her arms stiffly. "Hug," she said, voice flat. And yet, somehow, in some ridiculous, unfair way, it made her look impossibly cute. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. She was taller than Cecilia and Rachel, but still shorter than me. She was also very much aware of our master watching, because the hug lasted approximately 1.5 seconds before she pulled back like she had a schedule to keep. "Okay. Done," she declared, turning around immediately. I caught the faintest hint of red dusting the tips of her elven ears. Lee chuckled. "Ah, young love." Seraphina's shoulders stiffened. I wisely decided to say nothing. Chapter 194, Seraphina Zenith, 2. We climbed into the luxury car that Seraphina and Lee had arrived in. It was sleek, high-tech, and effortlessly expensive, the kind of vehicle that made absolutely no sound when it moved, yet still managed to hum with the quiet promise of sheer, unrestrained power beneath the hood. Of course, they had come alone. With Lee Zenith, a high immortal ranker, ranked in the top 40 in the entire world, there was little need for bodyguards. The only reason anyone would even attempt to attack him would be if they had developed a sudden and overwhelming desire to die. As the car smoothly pulled away from the airport, Lee turned to me. "Arthur, I wanted to ask you something." I nodded, waiting. "Against Lucifer," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You hesitated when he unlocked his second gift." I nodded again. It wasn't something I was particularly proud of, but it had happened. When Lucifer had activated his second gift, I had felt it, a moment of uncertainty, sharp and paralyzing. Because in that instant, when his power had surged, something inside me had nearly cracked. Because I didn't know how to win. I almost gave up, I admitted. I was forced back. I didn't have an answer. Lee listened, his expression unreadable, as always. "The problem was my lich," I continued. "If I used him, I couldn't use light mana. Which, against Lucifer, was a serious problem." Lee nodded. "Only light and dark mana can hope to counter his white and black mana." "Exactly." Lucent Harmony had boosted my abilities, but it wasn't enough. Against Lucifer, the lesser elements just didn't cut it. His black and white mana existed on a different level, an ascended version of normal elements, beyond mere fire, water, earth, or wind. Which left me with a conundrum. If I abandoned light mana entirely, I could use Erebus properly, could wield my dark mana without restriction. But that wouldn't change the outcome. The result would still be the same. I needed to use them together, I said. And in that moment, I understood how. I couldn't before. Lee studied me for a long moment before nodding. Because there was no danger. I met his gaze. "Sometimes," he said, "a breakthrough only happens in danger." I exhaled, leaning back against the seat. He was right. Of course he was right. Some things could only be learned when your life was on the line. "So," Lee said, settling back into his seat with the ease of someone who had long since mastered both power and patience. "What do you want to learn from me?" "Second movement," I answered without hesitation. "I need a second movement for my grade 6 art, something to balance God Flash. I'll need it by the time I reach integration rank." Lee nodded, as if he'd expected as much. "And what do you think the second movement should be?" "Power," I said immediately. "Overwhelming, destructive power. God Flash is primarily speed, it lets me move. I need something that strikes." Lee considered this for a moment, then gave a satisfied nod. "Good answer." He tapped a finger against his armrest, thinking. "I have an idea for your training. Something that should help you develop exactly that." That was promising. "However," he continued, his gaze sharpening slightly, "this won't be easy. Creating a second movement, especially one of destructive power, will take time. A long time. And you're not even at integration rank yet." I nodded. I wasn't expecting it to be easy. If it was easy, it wouldn't be worth doing. Lee exhaled. "The training is going to be very difficult," he warned. He glanced at Serafina. "If it benefits Arthur," she said simply, "I don't mind." "Thanks for caring about me, Serafina," I said with a small smile. She blinked at me, expression unreadable. Then, in her usual, perfectly monotone voice, she replied. "Of course. We've got a long drive ahead of us," Lee said, stretching slightly as the car cruised smoothly along the road. "Let's discuss this properly. Do you understand how you managed to turn God Flash into a grade 6 movement?" "Emotions," I answered without hesitation. "Conceptualizing emotions and embedding them into the specific arrangement of mana." Lee nodded. "Correct." He tapped a thoughtful finger against the armrest. "There are two major ways to do this, positive and negative. You can channel virtues, benevolence, honor, resolve. Or you can draw from suffering, anger, grief, death. The key isn't choosing good or bad, that's meaningless. What matters is what resonates with you the most. What gives you power?" He looked at me carefully, gauging my understanding. "This isn't like the past, Arthur," he continued. "Negative emotions aren't inherently bad, and positive emotions aren't inherently good. It all depends on how you shape them." I nodded slowly. "For your training," he said, "we'll begin with a discovery period. You'll let various emotions flow through you, test them, see what clicks. Once you find the one that resonates, the one that works, we'll refine it. Maximize it. You'll get a concept, or at least something close to one." His gaze sharpened. "And when you reach integration rank, that's when you'll forge your second movement." I leaned back, thinking. Finding power in emotion, shaping it into something tangible. This wasn't just about strength. This was about becoming. "This is a very complex process," Serafina noted, her voice as measured as ever. "Much more than just learning a grade 6 art." "Of course," Lee Zenith chuckled, the kind of chuckle that carried the weight of far too much wisdom and just a hint of condescension. "After all, to even attempt creating a grade 6 art, you need grade 6 talent. But to practice a grade 6 art? You can scrape by with grade 3 talent." Serafina raised an eyebrow. "There's a reason there are so few grade 6 arts in the world," Lee continued. "Right now, your mastery is still in its infancy. But one day, you'll understand why they're considered transcendent arts." The drive continued in silence for a while after that, as I mulled over his words. Soon enough, the Mount Hua sect came into view. Nestled high in the mountains, it stood as a seamless fusion of ancient tradition and futuristic advancement, a place where stone pagodas and wooden training halls coexisted alongside mana-powered infrastructure and high-tech barriers that pulsed with barely contained energy. As the self-driving car pulled to a stop, the three of us stepped out. I breathed in the air, feeling the sharp, crisp mana flow through the very wind itself. This was where I had spent a week before. Now, I'd be here much longer. With more time, you'll make greater strides, Lee said, watching me carefully. From what I've seen, your body aspect and mind aspect are balanced, which is rare. I stilled. That wasn't the first time I had heard that. Archmage Charlotte had said the same thing. So that means my talent for spellcasting and swordsmanship are the same? I asked. Lee nodded. Astoundingly enough, yes. That was not normal. You have a body aspect gift in Lucent Harmony, Lee continued, but even then, your talent is evenly distributed. Which, frankly, is ridiculous, given your swordsmanship talent is already grade 6. I frowned. Then what does that mean for me? Lee shrugged. Well, I'm not a spellcaster. But if you're looking for an answer, it means you have the potential to redefine the current paradigms in spellcasting. I exhaled slowly. No pressure, then. That being said, Lee added, stretching, spellcasting and martial arts are fundamentally different. You'll have to figure that part out yourself. For now, Seraphina, take Arthur to get settled in before training begins. Okay, Seraphina said. As she moved past me, her hand barely brushed against mine, so lightly it could have been accidental. But Seraphina Zenith didn't do accidents. Follow me, she said, as if nothing had happened. I nodded and fell into step beside her. You're staying in my living quarters, she continued. I have multiple rooms, and you'll take one of them. I don't want you dealing with the other disciples. Thanks, Sarah, I said, smiling. She gave a slight nod, leading me through the sect grounds until we arrived at her residence, a 3-story house that somehow managed to feel both modern and timeless at the same time. Traditional architecture blended seamlessly with advanced technology, paper lanterns floated in midair, subtly powered by mana currents, while sleek, high-efficiency lighting illuminated the pathways in soft, warm glows. Inside, she gave me a quick tour, showing me everything from the expansive training hall to the minimalist yet luxurious rooms. Then, we stopped outside a small courtyard. A koi pond rested in the center, its water impossibly clear, reflecting the sky above like a perfect mirror. A plum blossom tree stood at its edge, its delicate pink petals occasionally drifting down into the water. Seraphina stood beside it, gazing at the pond. The water here is very cold, she said, her voice softer than usual. I like it. I glanced at her. She wasn't looking at me, but I could tell there was more to that statement than just a casual remark about pond temperatures. But this was Seraphina. She would say more when she was ready. For now, I simply nodded. It suits you. Chapter 195, Seraphina Zenith, 3. We can also swim together sometime, Seraphina suggested, her voice as composed as ever. That waterfall you used before, it's private. No other disciple, except those with the surname Zenith, can come near it. I inhaled sharply. So only 4 people in the entire Mount Hua sect have access to it, and I was allowed to just waltz in? Swimming with Seraphina sounded nice. For purely practical reasons, of course. The cold water was excellent for training resilience, and water resistance helped with movement control. Absolutely nothing to do with how she looked in a swimsuit. Nothing at all. It will be nice, she urged, though her tone remained as flat and unreadable as ever. I sighed. All right. We'll swim at night. She turned away, but I caught it, just the barest twitch of her lips curling upward. Cute. Eventually, she led me to my room, a giant bedroom, complete with my own bathroom, modern amenities blending seamlessly with traditional aesthetics. The whole place felt more like a luxury retreat than a sect disciple's quarters. After freshening up, I went to see Master Lee. He was waiting for me outside, standing with his arms crossed, the mountain breeze rustling his robes. All right, Arthur, he said, exhaling as if bracing for something. This is going to be difficult. I nodded. Figured as much. I've never created a grade 6 art either, Lee admitted, which was rare for him. So we're both going to be stumbling through this. Well, That was comforting. For now, he continued, we need to find which emotions resonate with you the most. The stronger the resonance, the stronger the foundation for your second movement. I nodded again. Tell me your most memorable experiences, positive or negative. While you focus on one at a time, coat your sword in aura. I'll observe the fluctuations and determine which emotion might be best suited for your second movement. I took a deep breath and gripped my sword. Memories. I let my mind wander, pulling up old moments, old feelings, old pains. Happiness, the rush of triumph when I first won a real fight. The quiet warmth of sitting with my family. The thrill of standing on the sovereign stage at Mythos Academy. Sadness, the moments of loss, of failure, of disappointment. Anger, the sharp, unrelenting fire of injustice, of being underestimated, of struggling against fate itself. I poured each one into my blade, letting my aura shift with them. The blade hummed differently each time. The air around it changed. But nothing clicked. Nothing burned. Then, finally, I reached that memory. I didn't even need to think too hard. It was always there, lurking in the quiet spaces of my mind. The time when I had starved. When I had nothing. No food. No warmth. No one to help me. I had curled up, body aching from hunger, stomach twisting into itself. I remembered the gnawing, the sheer helplessness of it. How the world didn't care. How people passed by without a second glance. That moment, that feeling, of pure, relentless survival, poured into my blade. And something changed. The air around the sword shook. The aura didn't just coat the blade, it wrapped around it like a second skin, clinging to it. The energy felt hungry. Desperate. Unyielding. Lee's eyes sharpened. He felt it too. I exhaled, my grip tightening. Lee stepped closer, observing the way my aura flickered around the blade, how it wouldn't fade immediately like before. This is it, he said finally, his voice quiet, almost reverent. This is the resonance. He looked at me, his gaze unreadable. You are strongest when you remember hunger. I swallowed. It made sense. Hunger wasn't just an absence of food. It was an absence of power. It was the thing that drove people to claw their way forward, to fight for survival. It wasn't anger, or sadness, or even ambition. It was need. And it never, ever left. Lee exhaled, stepping back. We'll begin shaping it into a technique tomorrow. I let go of my sword, but the feeling remained. The quiet, unrelenting hunger. This was going to be a long road. But I had never been afraid of hunger. I never imagined you felt something like that, Luna murmured in my mind, her voice laced with quiet surprise. With how well off your family is. I paused. Of course, she wouldn't have known. For some reason, Luna couldn't read my thoughts when I recalled my past life. It was the one thing that remained completely mine. That was why she hadn't realized I was a transmigrator. Arthur Nightingale had lived a comfortable life in this world, a stark contrast to my life before. That hunger. It wasn't just about food. It was the absence of something essential, the crushing weight of knowing you needed something to survive, but the world refused to give it to you. I had only survived because of Emma. And then she. I shook my head, shutting the thought down before it could pull me under. I couldn't cling to the past. I wasn't that weak. I had beaten Lucifer windward. I needed to move forward, not backward. I returned to the living quarters for a well-earned break. Given that it was the first day, I allowed myself the rare luxury of an early night. Dinner. A hot shower. A plan to go to bed at a reasonable hour. And then Serafina burst into my room. Wearing a bikini. I blinked. Then I blinked again, rapidly, because my brain had completely short-circuited. Silver hair, ice blue eyes, and that impossible elven beauty, combined with the fact that she was standing in my doorway, looking ethereal in the worst, or best, way possible, there was no way I was going to sleep after this. "Swim," she said simply, tilting her head. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Then finally managed, "Yeah, I'll be out. Give me 5 minutes." She nodded. But she didn't leave. We just stood there, staring at each other. The silence stretched. I sighed and went into the bathroom to change. When I stepped back out, Serafina gave me a once-over, then nodded in approval. Then, suddenly, she reached out and touched my hand. "Come with me, Arthur," she said. And for the first time, there was the slightest waver in her voice. "Are you that excited?" I asked as we stepped away from the main buildings, out into the open. She simply nodded as she continued to lead me. The cool night air hit my bare skin immediately, sending a sharp shiver down my spine. Mount Huasec was high. And it wasn't just high, it was located north in the eastern continent, where the cold was an old, familiar thing, creeping into your bones if you weren't careful. The sect itself had an advanced temperature-regulating array that kept the grounds comfortable, but the waterfall? The waterfall wasn't included in that. The two of us moved through the foliage, weaving past ancient trees and softly glowing mana-infused stones. Unlike me, Serafina didn't seem bothered by the cold at all. If anything, she was enjoying it. I, on the other hand, had no interest in freezing to death tonight. I should use a bit of mana, I thought, channeling a controlled flow of fire element mana through my core. A subtle warmth spread through my body, balancing out the chill just enough to keep me from feeling like an ice sculpture. We continued walking, the distant roar of the waterfall growing louder with each step. The air became sharper, tinged with moisture. And then, finally, we arrived. The waterfall cascaded down from the cliffside like a silver ribbon unraveling beneath the moonlight, its waters crashing into the pool below with a force that sent mist swirling into the air. It was untouched, pristine, isolated from the rest of the sect. A place that felt suspended in time. Serafina stepped forward, releasing my hand as she neared the edge. "Doesn't it look nice, Arthur?" she asked, glancing back at me. And then, she tucked a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear. And my breath caught. Because at that moment, under the soft glow of moonlight, against the backdrop of the waterfall's endless motion, she looked completely, perfectly picturesque. Like something out of a dream. Chapter 196, Serafina Zenith, 4. "You're really good with the cold," I remarked, adjusting to the frigid temperature. Serafina shrugged, entirely unaffected by the icy temperature. "I told you, I'm a half-elf," she said, as if that explained everything. "My strongest affinity is ice mana. My gift is ice mana. This?" She gestured around, where the freezing waterfall crashed into the basin around us. "This is a given for me." I nodded. Fair enough. With her lineage, it wasn't just expected that she'd be good with the cold, she thrived in it. "Are you too cold?" she asked suddenly, closing the distance between us in a way that sent a very different kind of chill down my spine. Her face, as usual, was hard to read, but I could feel her concern. "I'm fine," I said, flashing a smile. "And since I get to swim with you, it's worth it." Serafina blinked at me, processing that for a moment. Then, "You're very good with words, Arthur," she said, her ice blue eyes narrowing slightly. "Is that how you seduce all these girls?" "Wow, she's blunt." I tilted my head, smirking. "I thought you liked it." Her eyes narrowed further. Then, before I could react, she grabbed my hand, and threw me over her shoulder. One moment, I was standing. The next, I was airborne. As I flipped through the air, arms folded, I realized I could very easily use wind mana to right myself. Or even land on the water's surface without making a splash. But instead, my mind was stuck on one simple fact. Serafina's ears had turned pink. Cute, I thought absently, right before I hit the water. Cold. Cold. God, this is freezing. I immediately cycled more fire mana through my body, heating myself up just enough to avoid going into shock. When I surfaced, gasping, Serafina was watching me with undisguised amusement. Pfft, she giggled, her shoulders shaking slightly. You're terrible with the cold. I narrowed my eyes at her, but I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. She was swimming in the same freezing water, yet she was perfectly fine, without any mana circulation to keep her warm. Meanwhile, I was actively battling for my life against hypothermia. Unfair. Completely unfair. You look pretty when you laugh, I said, mostly just to see her reaction. Serafina exhaled through her nose, unamused. Stop trying to seduce me. And then she disappeared under the water. Why? I asked, half laughing, half curious. Then, she reappeared. Very close. Her hands found my stomach. Cold. The second her fingertips touched my skin, I felt it, a sharp, numbing chill seeping into my core, sending a shiver up my spine. My ears burned with the contrast between the heat in my body and the coolness of her touch. Not for long. Because the next moment, she blasted me with ice magic. I barely had time to react before my body froze over, a thin layer of frost creeping over my skin. It's not fair, she said, her voice perfectly level as she actively lowered my body temperature. Sarah, I hissed, forcing more fire mana through my core, heating myself just enough to counteract her magic. The water around me bubbled slightly from the conflicting temperatures. Thankfully, my mana rank was higher, meaning I could just barely hold my ground. Serafina tilted her head, watching as I struggled between not freezing solid and not overheating myself into unconsciousness. Then, just as quickly as she had struck, she let go. The ice magic faded. The cold water settled. She blinked up at me, expression unreadable. That was fun, she decided. I exhaled. This girl was dangerous. How was that fun? I asked, still trying to recover from the cold shock she'd just inflicted on me. It just was, Serafina said with a shrug, completely unbothered, as she continued swimming. She moved through the water effortlessly, cutting through it with a grace that made me narrow my eyes. At this point, isn't she more of a mermaid than an elf? Yes, her superhuman strength definitely played a part, but it wasn't just that, it was the way she belonged in the water, like it was her natural habitat. Like she had never known anything different. I watched her for a moment. Then, an idea formed. I should prank her back. I grinned, swimming closer to the rocky edge of the basin as Luna's sigils flared to life on my arms. Using my gift for something like this? Luna sighed dramatically in my head. I ignored her. Activating Black Star, I wove dark magic around myself, cloaking my presence even from Serafina's sharp senses. The water stilled where I had been just moments before. Serafina surfaced, scanning the area. Arthur? I stayed quiet, slowly moving toward her, hidden beneath the water. She frowned. Arthur, she called again, this time with a hint of concern. And then, I moved. I shot up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, the exact same way she had grabbed me earlier. Serafina startled, which, given how composed she usually was incredibly satisfying. What are you doing? She stuttered, whipping her head toward me. Just wanted to see if you feel cold, I said, grinning as I channeled ice mana into her. She shivered. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Her teeth clenched slightly. Oh, this was good. I pressed more ice mana into her, feeling the temperature around us drop ever so slightly. Serafina moved. Fast. She twisted with ease, breaking my grip like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Idiot, she said, her ice blue eyes narrowing dangerously. I raised my hands innocently. Did I do something wrong? Her face was warm now, blushing, despite the cold. You know what you did, she muttered, her usual composed voice cracking just a little. And then, in a voice just barely above a whisper, she added. I don't mind if you want to do that. Or more, but surprise. I heard it. A chill, completely unrelated to the cold water, ran down my spine. What does that mean? I narrowed my eyes at her. She narrowed hers back. Then, without another word, she dove under the water. And suddenly, I had a very bad feeling about what she was going to do next. Serafina moved fast, too fast. But I had already predicted her. Or at least, I thought I had. Before I could counter, the water beneath me solidified in an instant, freezing over with an almost effortless precision. My body locked in place, pinned against the ice. I blinked. Sarah? Idiot, she muttered, tucking a loose strand of silver hair behind her ear. She exhaled, her breath visible in the sudden chill she had created. You said you weren't ready. And then you touched me. I swallowed. I may have made a mistake. Stay still, she ordered. I wasn't exactly in a position to disobey, given the whole being trapped in ice situation. My gaze met hers, ice-blue eyes, cool and unreadable. Then, inevitably, my focus drifted. Her cute button nose. The soft pink of her lips. The graceful line of her collarbone, barely visible in the moonlight. Serafina's eyes narrowed. She noticed. Pervert, she accused flatly, though there was no actual malice in her voice. If anything, was she pleased? Cecilia already did this to you, right? She asked, tilting her head slightly. I barely had time to process that statement before she leaned in closer, the warmth of her breath ghosting against my skin. Can I? There was no universe in which I could refuse. She leaned in. Our noses brushed, her breath mixing with mine, before she tilted her head ever so slightly. And then, our lips met. Chapter 197, Serafina Zenith, 5. Strands of silver moonlight slipped through the gaps in the clouds, casting a quiet glow over the world below. They settled upon the basin of a secluded waterfall in Mount Hua Sect, where the water flowed endlessly, untouched by the passage of time. And there, in the basin, atop a small frozen platform, lay two figures. A boy in swim trunks, pinned down by a girl who was kissing him. The kiss was brief, just a moment, a brush of warmth amidst the cold night air, but when they pulled apart, both were left breathing hard, the space between them charged with something neither quite knew how to handle. Then. Splash. The ice beneath them shattered, sending both of them plunging into the water. Sarah. Arthur sputtered as he surfaced, running a hand through his soaked hair. But Serafina was already gone, disappearing beneath the water like a phantom. Talk tomorrow, her voice rang out from the other end of the basin before she swam away, faster than seemed reasonable. Arthur exhaled, watching her retreat before sighing and making his way out of the water. What did I just do? Serafina floated beneath the surface, her silver hair swirling around her like a halo as bubbles drifted up toward the moonlit sky. Her fingers touched her lips. Soft. She had kissed Arthur. She had kissed Arthur. She had kissed Arthur. A tremor of realization rippled through her, unspooling her normally composed thoughts into something completely unruly. How? Why? Who? Her mind refused to function properly. It had started as nothing more than curiosity. Entertainment. At first, it had been amusing, watching Rachel and Cecilia, two fellow princesses, completely lose their minds over Arthur, fighting over him like he was some rare treasure. She had found it fascinating. But then, somehow, somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with him, too. Serafina groaned, squeezing her eyes shut as if that would undo reality. This was not how things were supposed to go. And yet, she remembered something. A book. A particular book she had purchased, its title now etched into her mind with an almost ridiculous clarity. 101 Ways to Seduce a Man. One of the chapters had been very specific. Invite him to swim in private. Wear something that will attract his attention. Serafina had read it. Absorbed it. And, remembering how Arthur had looked at her before, she had tested it. And it had worked. Too well. Her thoughts spiraled back to that moment, the way his gaze had lingered, the subtle heat in his expression. Serafina glanced down at herself. Her face burned, despite the freezing temperature. With a sharp inhale, she dunked her head underwater, letting the cold shock her system back to normal. It didn't help. I shouldn't lose, Serafina muttered to herself as she stood alone beneath the stars. Rachel had her charm, an endlessly energetic, kind, cheerleader-like presence that made people feel warm just by being near her. Cecilia had her dark charm, seductive, teasing, confident in a way that made it impossible to ignore her. And then there was Rose, who was like flowing water, graceful, adaptable, effortlessly complementing Arthur's personality in a way that felt natural. Serafina couldn't lose to them. Not because of pride. Not because of competition. But because, for the first time in her life, she had found someone precious to her, someone who meant something beyond obligation, beyond duty. Someone she wanted. I'll be more provocative, she declared, clenching her fists in newfound determination. Unfortunately, things did not go according to plan. And, much to her frustration, the problem wasn't Arthur. It was her. The next day, when she saw him approaching in the training grounds, her body reacted before her mind did. Her face flushed instantly. And before she could stop herself, she turned on her heel and walked in the opposite direction. No. Not walked. Fled. What the hell am I doing? She screamed internally, trying to force herself to stop. Focus, Serafina. That did absolutely nothing. By the time the sun had set, she realized, with dawning horror, that she had successfully avoided Arthur for the entire day. She had not spoken to him once. She sat on the stone steps outside her living quarters, staring up at the night sky in a daze. I didn't talk to Arthur even once, she muttered, as if saying it aloud would somehow make it less pathetic. The realization sank in, heavy and stupid. She pursed her lips. I wish I could be as shameless as Cecilia, she thought bitterly. Cecilia had kissed Arthur and acted like it was just another Tuesday. Serafina kissed Arthur and proceeded to behave like a malfunctioning automaton, barely capable of eye contact. She exhaled sharply, covering her face with her hands. This was not how this was supposed to go. Well, a familiar feminine voice drawled. Looks like the little girl has finally grown up. Boy trouble? Serafina jumped slightly before turning her head toward the speaker. Master May, she greeted, straightening instinctively. Master May, a mid-immortal ranker of Mount Hua sect, stood there with an amused smirk. In her 50s but looking nowhere near it, May had long black hair, sharp dark eyes, and the kind of effortless grace that made her presence impossible to ignore. She was one of the few people Serafina was truly close to, someone who had guided her through childhood and into the warrior she was now. What is it? May said, dropping down to sit beside her on the steps. Mind telling this old hag? Serafina hesitated, fingers fidgeting against the fabric of her robe. May's lips quirked. My, she chuckled. It really is boy trouble. Serafina twitched slightly. It must be that boy you brought here again, May continued, a knowing glint in her eye. Arthur Nightingale, isn't it? The one who beat Lucifer windward. Of course May would put the pieces together that fast. As one of the masters of Mount Hua sect, she was well aware of the prophecy, and the fact that Lucifer windward was widely believed to be the second hero. Which meant she also knew about the boy who, at the same age as Lucifer, had beaten him in a fair fight, an event that had sent waves of confusion through every powerful figure who had ever taken the prophecy seriously. Serafina swallowed, her cheeks warming. Yes, she admitted quietly. May hummed. He is a cute one, she mused, tilting her head. I can see why you fell for him. So, what's the problem? Serafina exhaled sharply. I kissed him, she confessed. There was a beat of silence. And then. Wow. May said, her voice genuinely shocked. I didn't know you were so brave. But, Serafina muttered, shifting slightly where she sat. It happened a bit weirdly. And, there are also these 3 girls. She exhaled and, after a brief moment of hesitation, laid everything out before Master May. The whole mess. The kiss. The way she had immediately proceeded to avoid him like a coward. The other girls, Rachel, Cecilia, Rose, each of them undeniably drawn to Arthur in their own way. May listened patiently, nodding along, occasionally humming in thought. Then, after a long pause, she gave her verdict. So he's trash, May declared. Serafina jerked upright. Master May. What? May shrugged, entirely unbothered. He's playing with the hearts of multiple young girls at the same time. That is, by definition, trash behavior, young lady. Serafina opened her mouth. Closed it. Frowned. But. She started hesitantly. I like him. May nodded sagely. Ah. So he's incredible trash. Serafina twitched. May ticked off on her fingers. The future saintess, the archwitch, the heir to Vaucourt, and now you, the girl who never cared about any boy before this. He managed to capture the hearts of 3 princesses and a count's daughter in under a year. She let out a low whistle. That's a level of efficiency I can almost respect. Don't call him trash, Serafina muttered, her voice quieter now. May held up her hands in surrender. All right. I won't. She tilted her head slightly, watching Serafina carefully. But now you're afraid you'll lose him to the others? Serafina pursed her lips. She hated how accurate that was. I wouldn't worry about that if I were you, May said casually, stretching her legs out in front of her. Serafina frowned. Why not? May gave her a knowing look. Because if he's not trash, then what you think will happen, won't happen. Serafina narrowed her eyes. And if I am wrong? Then, my dear, May said, sighing dramatically, you should be very worried. Serafina huffed. He's not trash. Then don't worry, May shrugged, completely unbothered. Just because he likes multiple girls doesn't mean he values any of you less. From what I've seen, he seems to like all 4 of you equally, so I wouldn't waste time panicking over being abandoned. Serafina was quiet for a moment, processing that. So. I was worried for nothing, she muttered finally, exhaling. Yep. May said cheerfully. Then, after a beat, she added, and I have to say, that was an incredibly cute look on our ice princess. Serafina twitched. But before she could react, May continued, tone turning just a shade more thoughtful. But there is something else. Serafina looked at her warily. What is it? May smirked. Even if he does love you all equally, you do realize that not all of you can be first. Serafina froze. First? May chuckled. Oh, Sarah. You know what I mean. The implications hit Serafina all at once. First. The first one to be with him. The first one to be his wife. Official order mattered in these things. Typically, status determined everything, but her status was equal to both Cecilia Slatemark and Rachel Creighton, meaning they could contend for that position just as much as she could. May turned to gauge her reaction, expecting an indignant protest, a logical counter, maybe even a rare moment of Serafina's competitive streak flaring to life. Instead, Serafina sat there, face completely red, fingers clenching her robe. Doing that with Arthur, she mumbled under her breath. May blinked. Then grinned. Oh my gods, you got cute again, she laughed, throwing her head back. I really should thank him for that. Serafina glared at her, though the effect was somewhat ruined by the fact that she still looked thoroughly flustered. May stood up, stretching lazily. Talk to him, Serafina, she advised, voice softer this time. Don't be embarrassed about your feelings. And with that, she walked away, leaving Serafina alone under the stars, still blushing, still thinking about firsts, and absolutely, completely helpless against her own traitorous thoughts. Chapter 198, Serafina Zenith, 6. I kept up my training with Master Li. Then it was time to begin. Starvation. Not the proper, historical kind, the kind that turned empires to dust and sent people clawing at the earth for a single root to gnaw on. No, this was the controlled variety, the sort that made you understand without actually making you drop dead. Which, as far as training methods went, was a relief. 2 weeks. No food. Isolation training. Master Li assured me it wouldn't kill me. He said that with the kind of certainty only someone else could have about your suffering. What it would do was push me past the illusions of my body, strip me down, force me to see my limits for what they were, then take a step beyond them. I wanted to see Serafina before I went in. Serafina, on the other hand, seemed to have taken the opposite stance. She had avoided me all day. She wasn't the type to outright run, but she had suddenly become very busy, too busy to look me in the eye, too busy to stop walking when I called her name. I could have left it at that. But the moment I even considered walking away, something in my chest clenched, and I knew I couldn't. So I found her. She was sitting by the koi pond in her living quarters, dipping her feet into the water, her expression unreadable. The soft glow of artificial lanterns flickered against the rippling surface, casting long shadows over her face. The city outside stretched into the sky, neon towers blinking against the clouds, but here, the air was still. Serafina, I said. She turned, slow and deliberate. Her expression was controlled, except for the telltale pink dusting her cheeks and ears. She didn't run. That was a start. She hesitated, her fingers curling against her sleeve. I'm sorry. For running away. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't exactly sprint. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. You know what I mean. She exhaled, some of the stiffness leaving her shoulders. I don't regret it. The kiss. Her voice was quiet, but steady. I just wasn't sure what to do next. I met her gaze. The lights of Mount Hua reflected in her ice-blue eyes, like the sky before a storm. Yeah, I admitted. Me neither. For a while, neither of us spoke. The water lapped softly at the stone, the distant hum of hovercrafts barely reaching us. Then, without another word, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. She stilled, just for a second, then, slowly, returned the embrace, her hands gripping the back of my jacket like she needed to hold on. It was brief. But it was enough. I pulled back just slightly. I'll be back in 2 weeks. She nodded. And this time, when I turned to leave, she stayed where she was. Master Li was waiting for me at the entrance of the isolation chamber. The cave yawned open before me, cold and utterly black, like the mountain itself had decided to swallow me whole. It stretched deep into the earth, cutting off all sound, all light. It would be just me, my body, and the creeping, relentless hunger. I stepped inside. At first, it was fine. The first hours were the easiest. The human body is an efficient machine, it can go a long time without food, running on reserves, tricking itself into thinking everything is normal. But soon, normal started to slip. The hunger began as a dull ache, then sharpened, spreading like roots through my stomach, twisting, clenching. My body, used to routine nourishment, began to rebel. It whispered, then shouted, demanding that I listen. My limbs felt heavier, my breath slower, my energy flickering like a dying flame. But Lee had said I wouldn't just be sitting here. No, I trained. I trained while my stomach roared at me like a starving beast. I trained as my legs grew sluggish, as my arms trembled. The first few days were brutal. Every punch, every strike of my blade, drained me further. My body burned through whatever it had left, and then, when there was nothing, it started taking. It stole from my muscles, from my strength. I could feel it, the slow disassembly of myself, piece by piece, as my own body devoured itself. By the fourth day, I was dizzy even when standing still. By the sixth, the hunger had become a constant companion, no longer sharp and biting, but deep and all-consuming, a black hole pulling at the edges of my awareness. Loosened harmony helped. Barely. Luna's voice murmured in the back of my mind, guiding me through the haze. Find stillness within it. You are not your hunger. You are beyond it. I clung to those words like a man drowning in the dark. By the 8th day, my vision blurred if I moved too fast. By the 10th, I stopped feeling hunger at all. It had transformed into something else, something beyond pain, beyond sensation. My body was weak, but my mind had found something else, clarity. I had never been so aware of my own body before. Every breath, every heartbeat, every drop of manna that flowed through me, it was all there, as clear as the stars in the night sky. On the 12th day, I could barely stand. On the 14th, I was stronger than I had ever been. Lee found me sitting in the darkness, my blade resting across my lap, my mind calm and empty. Good, he said. He dropped something in front of me. The smell hit me like a freight train. Rich, warm, overwhelming. Food. My stomach clenched, my body screamed, but I didn't move. Lee gave a satisfied grunt. Eat. You've earned it. I reached forward, my fingers finding a small loaf of bread. I tore a piece off, placed it in my mouth, and let it dissolve on my tongue. It tasted like something divine. Like life itself. I ate slowly, keeping my breath steady, letting the nourishment fuel me without controlling me. The hunger was still there, still clawing, but I held it at bay. Lee didn't give me time to rest. The moment I finished, he had me moving again. My body was a mess, muscles depleted, limbs unsteady, but every strike felt cleaner. Every movement sharper. You've endured deprivation, Lee said, pacing around me. Now it's time to rebuild. I simply stood there, suppressing the smirk on my face. Because in the depths of starvation, I had found something else. I had found the idea for my second movement. Chapter 199, Serafina Zenith, 7. My past life wasn't peaceful. Not even close. I was an orphan. No family, no connections, just another kid dumped into an orphanage that barely functioned as a place for raising children and more as a warehouse for unwanted lives. They sent us to public school, though, because even warehouses needed upkeep, and an educated product was worth more than an uneducated one. For me, studying wasn't just something to pass the time. It was hope. Knowledge was power. And power was the only way out. So I worked hard. Harder than anyone else. I got perfect grades, memorized textbooks until I could recite them in my sleep. The teachers thought I was a prodigy. The other kids thought I was an easy target. I didn't care. They bullied me, shoved me into lockers, stole my books, whispered words designed to cut deeper than any knife. But none of it mattered. Because studying was everything. Then Emma came into my life. And suddenly, for the first time, I wasn't alone. The bullying stopped. Not because I got stronger, but because suddenly there was someone standing beside me, and that changed the equation. Emma was my first friend. My first real person. And I thought that meant I had one. I was wrong. The biggest crime in the world was being weak. Because I was weak, I lost everything. Because I was weak, I went hungry when the caretakers decided some kids deserved more food than others. Because I was weak, I was kicked around like an unwanted stray, bullied, ignored, forgotten. Because I was weak. Emma died. What a lonely feeling, Master, Erebus said, breaking the silence. I was sitting at the edge of a cliff, staring down at the distant sprawl of the world below. It wasn't much of a view, just the view of nature and endless expanse of the world below. I had just come back from 2 weeks of starvation, a training exercise that Master Li had apparently thought was a fun idea. Seraphina wasn't in the sect right now, so I was alone. Or, as alone as you could be with a sentient ancient undead hanging around. Lonely, huh, I said, leaning back on my hands, letting the cool night air brush against my face. Maybe. Erebus wasn't like Luna. Luna was a guiding presence, a whisper of light and wisdom, always careful, always composed. Erebus, on the other hand, felt human in a way Luna never did. He had emotions, thoughts, opinions. And unlike Luna, he didn't seem to mind talking about the things I didn't want to admit out loud. He was also the only person I could trust with things I wouldn't tell anyone else. Because he was bound to me. Because he would never betray me. I now understand Master's will to get stronger, Erebus said. His voice was smooth, his words deliberate. For Master, power is hope itself. It is, I said simply. If I had been stronger, Emma wouldn't have died. If I had been smarter, I could have saved her. Because in my past life, intelligence was power. Here, power was, well, power. Raw strength. Mana. Fighting ability. The ability to make sure no one could ever take anything from me again. I will reach the top, I said, stretching my arm towards the sky. The stars were dull here, drowned out by the glow of the city below, but I reached anyway. So I can protect them all. I will assist you in every way possible, Master, Erebus said, his voice steady. I know, I smiled slightly. And thanks for letting me use bone armor on you. I know it's annoying. No need to thank me for performing my duty, Master, he replied. I let out a small chuckle. Of course you'd say that. The night stretched on, and for once, the silence wasn't so heavy. My time at the Mount Hua sect was coming to an end. June was creeping towards its final days, and with it, my departure. I had learned a lot here, more than I expected, more than I probably should have in such a short time, but now it was time to put more pieces into motion. For the future. Arthur. A familiar, mellifluous voice cut through my thoughts. I turned around, Erebus shifting beside me, his skeletal form casting long, sharp-edged shadows in the dimming light. Seraphina. You're back, she said, her golden eyes flickering between me and Erebus. There was something unreadable in her gaze, something guarded. Return, Erebus, I said. Without hesitation, he bowed and vanished into the swirling void of his spatial rift, his presence dissolving like mist. Seraphina stepped forward and, without waiting for an invitation, sat down beside me at the cliff's edge. For a while, she just stared out over the landscape, Mount Hua's towering peak stretching endlessly into the horizon, the neon lights of distant floating cities blinking like artificial stars. The wind tugged at her hair, making it ripple like liquid silver under the moonlight. What were you doing here? She asked finally. Thinking, I said. She hummed, as if that answer was expected. Was the training hard? Yes, but fulfilling at the same time, I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. I'm glad, she said, then paused before adding, I like helping you. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I could feel she wasn't finished yet. You might think I'm close to my father, she said suddenly, her voice quieter now, almost detached. But I'm not. I, of course, already knew this. The novel had laid it out in excruciating detail, but I didn't interrupt. This was her moment to speak, not mine. My father doesn't see me, she continued, her hands resting loosely in her lap. He doesn't see Son either. Not really. And I suppose I just gave up on that. Her voice was even, but there was something bitter underneath, something worn out. All Sun wants is to suppress me, and I can't do anything about it regardless. I tilted my head. Why can't you? She let out a humorless chuckle. My adopted brother is more talented than me, she said simply. He's a monster. Sun Zenith. The youngest person in recorded history to reach ascendant rank. He had done it at 19, setting a standard so high that most people couldn't even comprehend it. His talent was the kind that made the world take notice. But I knew the truth. Sun Zenith was a genius. An absolute freak of nature, a once-in-a-generation prodigy. But Seraphina? She was better. She didn't believe it, not yet. She had spent so long looking up at him, convinced he was unreachable, that she had never thought to turn around and realize she had already surpassed him. The 7 in Class 1A were beyond prodigies. They weren't just the best of their generation, they were the kind of people who redefined what the best even meant. And Seraphina was one of them. She just didn't know it yet. I wonder if that's possible yet. The thought drifted through my mind as I studied her. My brain ran through calculations, threading together probabilities, checking variables. It wasn't a habit I could turn off. Every fight, every encounter, every moment, I was always running simulations in the background. And now, the question was, could we do it? Only one way to find out. Seraphina, I said, leaning back on my palms. Come on a trip with me tomorrow. She blinked. A trip? Yeah, just for a few days, I said. I want to show you something. Her gaze sharpened slightly. What do you want to show me? Surprise, I grinned. But it has to be just the two of us. She tilted her head. Just us two? Yep. I smirked. But don't get too excited. Her eyes narrowed. I think you're forgetting who the staring pervert was. I blinked. That was an accident. Was it? She said, utterly monotone, staring straight into my soul. I coughed. Anyway, do you want to come with me or not? Seraphina exhaled, long-suffering, before nodding. Yes. Good, I said. Let's talk about this tomorrow, she said, standing up and brushing off her robes. It's late. Let's turn in for the night. I watched her for a moment before following suit. Tomorrow, we'd find out just how possible this really was. Chapter 200, Northern Sea Ice Palace, 1. Getting permission from Lee Zenith was almost too easy. He barely questioned me, just nodded and gave the go-ahead like I'd asked to borrow a training manual instead of taking his uncle on a trip to a place that most people wouldn't even think about visiting. Apparently, I'd earned his trust. That, or he had too much faith in Seraphina's ability to keep me in check. So, are you going to tell me where we're going? Seraphina asked as we walked. Northern Sea Ice Palace, I said. Seraphina stopped mid-step. Her usually composed expression faltered, not much, just the tiniest crack in the mask she always wore. But for her, that was as good as shouting. And I understood why. Seraphina's father was Mo Zenith, the current sect leader of Mount Hua and a radiant rank swordsman whose strength made even the most arrogant warriors think twice. But her mother? Her mother had been the Northern Sea Ice Palace's lord, a legendary elven ice mage, and, if we were strictly measuring strength, even stronger than her uncle Lee Zenith. But the Northern Sea Ice Palace didn't exist anymore. It had been destroyed. Back in 2035, when the Shadow Seekers launched their northern campaign after the Creighton land was also attacked by the Arch-Lich, they didn't just push into human territory, they annihilated everything in their path. The Northern Sea Ice Palace, standing between the northern and eastern continents, had been their grand prize. And they took it. Burned it. Razed it. Seraphina had been young when it happened. Too young to fight, too young to stop it. But that was the moment she had changed. That was when she had become cold. Why? She asked. Her voice wavered. Not much, but enough. Enough for me to know she didn't want to go. She didn't want to step onto the ruined island where her mother had died. But she hadn't refused outright. She had asked me why. Which meant, despite everything, she trusted me. Serafina, I said, turning to face her. Do you trust me? She looked up at me, her ice blue eyes glassy with something she wasn't quite letting surface. Then, after a moment, she nodded. There's something important there, I said. Something you need to see. She was silent for a long time, her thoughts unreadable. Then, finally, she exhaled and nodded again. Okay, she said. I put my belief in you. Thank you, I smiled. After the destruction of the Northern Sea Ice Palace, Missouri Zenith had forbidden anyone from setting foot on its remains. A decree from a king wasn't something people ignored. But Serafina, his daughter, was the one person who could bypass that rule. She just never wanted to. She never wanted to stand where her mother had fallen. And yet, here she was. Choosing to go anyway. Because of me. I watched Serafina, quiet and withdrawn, staring like it held the answers to questions she didn't want to ask. It's a bit early, but it'll help her a lot. Each of them, Rachel, Serafina, and Cecilia, had a trial to surpass. Something standing between them and their true potential. A threshold they had to cross before they reached the wall. And the only way past it was through. Their trials weren't about strength, not in the physical sense. No, these were the wounds that couldn't be healed with mana or time. Old scars buried so deep they had become part of them. To move forward, they had to confront them. Serafina's trial was here, at the ruins of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. We used a warp gate to reach a port city, the closest one to the now abandoned island where the palace once stood. The city itself was lively, bright neon signs flashing over the streets, hovercrafts humming above, the usual blend of merchants, sailors, and travelers moving through the docks. But for us, this was just a stop. Serafina had to call for a boat. Technically, this entire sea was restricted territory, completely off-limits by MO Zenith's orders. But for Serafina, an exception was made. For me, by extension, an exception was tolerated. So we boarded the automated boat and set out towards the island. The vessel was sleek, all polished metal and reinforced glass, gliding effortlessly over the water. It was fast, meant for dignitaries and high-ranking officials, not for two people visiting a place that didn't exist on any official map anymore. Serafina was quiet. More than usual. She sat with her arms folded, her eyes downcast, saying nothing as the boat cut through the waves. I need to cheer her up a bit. I crouched and dipped my fingers into the water. Cold. Not surprising, considering where we were headed. The chill bit at my skin, sharp and crisp. I made my decision and stopped the boat. Serafina blinked, her head tilting slightly. Why are we stopping? Let's swim, I said. She gave me a look. A very unimpressed look. Here. Why not? I shrugged. It's not like we'll drown or anything. Underwater beasts did exist in this world, but in these waters, at this depth, nothing stronger than a 4-star creature would be lurking. In other words, nothing we couldn't handle. Serafina sighed. I don't have my swimsuit. I brought it, I said, pulling it out of my spatial ring and holding it out to her. I was expecting maybe a flicker of amusement. A small smile, even. Instead, she narrowed her eyes, staring at the swimsuit like I had just handed her a detailed confession of every crime I had ever committed. Pervert, she said. I blinked. What? You picked up my bikini and stored it in your spatial ring. And? Pervert. I exhaled. Just change. Her gaze remained suspicious, but after a moment, she took the swimsuit and went below deck. The boat was large, closer to a private yacht than a simple transport. It had all the amenities a person could ask for. Which meant, at the very least, she had a place to change in peace. Soon enough, both of us were in the water, the boat floating silently behind us, perfectly still despite the gentle movement of the waves. I glanced back at it, watching as it hovered just above the surface, its sleek, automated design keeping it locked in place without the need for an anchor. Technology is so cool, I thought. Somewhere, ancient sailors were probably turning in their watery graves, cursing the fact that their descendants no longer had to wrestle with ropes and heavy iron. Anyway, I said, kicking lazily through the water. This is nice, right? Serafina floated beside me, her pale hair fanning out in the water like silver threads. Yes, she agreed. Her voice was softer than before, but lighter. The weight in her expression had eased, even if it hadn't disappeared entirely. She liked cold water, I knew that much. I'd seen her in the waterfalls of Mount Hua, the way she always seemed more at ease when surrounded by crisp, freezing currents. For a while, we just swam. The sea stretched around us, dark and endless, but not suffocating. The air was sharp and clear, the kind of cold that stung at first but then settled into something invigorating. The stars above flickered, their light barely visible against the glow of distant floating cities. Eventually, we climbed back onto the boat, the chill clinging to our skin. A quick shower, a change of clothes, and soon enough, we were back on the deck. Let's keep going, I said once we were both settled again. Serafina didn't respond immediately. She was staring out at the sea, her expression unreadable, before she finally spoke. Thanks, she said quietly. I just smiled. The boat glided forward, cutting through the waves, carrying us toward the Northern Sea Ice Palace.